Good evening, everyone. This is Councilman.
Good evening, Councilmember Roach.
Works.
Good evening and welcome to the City of Pasco Council Special Meeting and Regular Workshop. The council thanks you for being part of our city government. At special meetings, the council takes formal actions on specific items and during the workshops, only discusses issues with no formal actions taken. Following Governor Inslee's recent statewide mask mandate, facial masks are required to be worn at all times while in council chambers. If any individual is unable to comply with this order, then the meeting will be recessed until compliance is met. If compliance is not met, then the individual refuses to leave the chambers, then the meeting will either be recessed or reconvene only virtually to be adjourned. Agenda packets are available in the City of Pasco's website at www.pasco-wa.gov/agenda. And please note that the City Council meetings and workshops may be accessed through GoToWebinar. This meeting is also being televised live on Pasco TV, channel 191, on Spectrum Cable in Pasco and Richland, and is streamed on the city's Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel. This and previous council meeting video is available on the city's website. And lastly, the public may submit their comments and or questions by contacting the city manager, city clerk, or by using the Ask Pasco app. And with that, we will have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Alvarado.
In person, present.
Maloney.
Present.
Milne.
Present.
Roach.
Present.
Serrano.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Barajas.
Present.
And Mayor Martinez.
Present. Thank you. Everybody's here tonight. Would you all please rise for the flag salute, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I would just like to make a note, we have a very busy agenda tonight, and I know we have a bunch of great presentations and a lot of things to go over, so just keep that in mind as we're giving our presentations and going through this long schedule. And then at the end, we will have an executive session tonight, so we'll get to that part when that time comes. Just wanted to make everybody aware. So with that, we will move right along to for the special meeting. We have an ordinance and resolution not related to hearings, and we have funds for ARPA Utility Assistance Program. Director Rita, would you like to kick us off for that, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and evening council. The package, the staff report in front of you is a request for an additional $50,000 in the form of utility assistance and utilizing the ARPA funding received by the city. The council has allocated over $1.1 million so far for this purpose, which is to assist our residents with deferment of their utility bills. And this program has been really successful. We have assisted over 3,000 customers between Franklin PUD and the City of Pasco, and we're collecting information with the Basin Disposal Inc. as well. At this point, the city and staff is asking for $50,000 for its city utility services, and I want to make that distinction. Because we've been able to help a lot of people, but we just have that last little mile to go. And we are working with all of our residents and our customers to ensure that they're available, that they're aware of this available resource. And we have 2 zones. We usually bill in 4 different zones, and we've already communicated with all of the residents in zone 1 and 2. And as we're trying to contact zone 3 and 4 as a last effort to ensure that they're aware of this program, we've fallen just a little bit short. So we're asking council for $50,000 that we believe would provide assistance to our customers who might not have been aware of or not able to apply for this program in the past. And we have expended all of the funds allocated to us at this point, so this is just to get us through that finish line.
Thank you, Director Richa. Any council members have any questions or comments for Director Sigdell? Well, I would just like to say thank you. I mean, this is just goes on to show that, you know, how much assistance that is being provided. The assistance that some of these folks who haven't got any kind of funding anywhere else are being considered for this funding as well, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions or comments from council, I would entertain them. Oh, yes, council member.
Just a quick,
I'm not used to this.
yeah, just want to commend the city, you know, having a little bit of conversations with other electeds from different jurisdictions, that there's some jurisdictions that don't know what to do with their ARPA funds and have not allocated it, and are just perhaps thinking that it might just be needed for retrofitting city services. So I really appreciate the city of Pasco's ability to get these funds out and to the folks that need them. And so I just really want to just give that perspective.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, would you like to entertain a motion?
Absolutely, Mayor. I move to approve resolution number 4106, authorizing an amount not to exceed $50,000 of Department of Treasury funds from the American Rescue Plan Act.
All right, so there's a motion to approve resolution number 4106. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Did we
Opposed?
need a second?
Excuse me?
Did we need a second?
Oh, did we?
I mean, I'll
We
happily
didn't get one?
second it, and then
Okay, my
say
mistake.
aye.
Sorry about that. All right, so we have a motion to approve resolution 4106. Do I hear a second?
I'll happily second that, and
Thanks.
I'll also say aye very soon.
Thanks, Councilmember Serrano. I appreciate that for that correction. And now we can move on to say all those in favor to approve resolution number 4106 signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. It passes unanimously. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the special meeting, and we'll move to the City Council workshop meeting. And with housekeeping issues out of the way, we will go on to verbal reports from council members. Anybody, any council members have anything they'd like to report? If not, the only announcement I would like to make is, well, I'm going to save it for later, so I apologize for that. So if there's nobody that would like to, or have anything to say, then I'll move right on for items of discussion. So tonight, we'd like to start with the Pasco Public Facilities District Board update on pending ballot issues. Director Mckay, would you like to lead us off with that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Zach Mckay, Administrative and Community Services Director this evening. And on behalf of the Pasco Public Facilities District, they've requested to update and report on the work that they have been doing over the last couple of years, and some of the future outreach efforts and future ballot efforts that they will be presenting to the City of Pasco electorate. I will be giving a little bit of history on this topic to the council and to the public. This evening we are joined by Chairman Mark Morissette, Chairman of the Pasco PFD, and he will be presenting as well. We also have board members, Dr. Spence Jalek, we have Caroline Bowdish, and we have Leonard Dietrich present in the council chambers this evening. One board member, Marie Gillespie, is not available to attend with us this evening, but I'm sure she is watching through our various electronic outreach mechanisms. So we'll launch in a little bit here on the history. So what you're going to see tonight is just the aquatic facility concept, some discussion on the financial analysis, and then information on the upcoming election. So through this effort, the Pasco Public Facilities District is proposing to take to the voters an indoor-outdoor aquatic facility. It's slated to be built in two phases. The first phase being just shy of 50,000 square feet. taking up 4 acres. We'll have the concepts are shown to have an indoor leisure pool, outdoor activity pool, wet classroom, party room, outdoor concessions for the summertime, and then locker rooms, offices, and support spaces such as mechanical and storage. Phase 2, which projections show, we'll get into later in the presentation, that the cash balance Phase 2 could come about 10 to 15 years down the road, is an 8-lane competition pool indoor, just over 13,000 square feet, and for a total of a 60,000 square foot building at full build out. Not going to go too detailed into this picture, but this is sort of a concept of what you would see with an aquatic facility similar in size to what the PFD is proposing. So everything on the right encompasses both the indoor and outdoor aquatics facilities. All the little squares and rectangles and geometric shapes that are multicolored with numbers assigned to them in the middle are going to be your various changing rooms, your locker rooms, the party room that the public can rent out, entryways, offices, that sort of thing. And then on the left-hand side would be a future Phase 2 with the 8-lane by 25-yard indoor competition pool. So typical features that you would see in facilities such as these, you see these all over the United States, including many in Washington and Oregon. Just some of the indoor water slides. The lower left corner would be something more suited to the under 5 children under 5 years old, and just various items that could be placed inside an indoor year-round aquatic facility. So a little bit of history going into this. I know that this facility's been talked about for a number of years, beginning with a community survey just over 10 years ago. Pasco voters and Pasco residents have perennially supported a project similar to this. There was an effort with the Regional Public Facilities District to take this to a vote region-wide, so that would be with Pasco, but also Kennewick and Richland in 2013. And while that vote in its entirety was not successful, the Pasco electorate favored the development of an aquatic center by 57%. It's also, Pasco, as we all know, is the fastest growing city in the region and generally has the youngest population. So that also lends a lot to the support for facilities such as this. As we stated, in 2013, the regional PFD did not have a successful ballot election for this topic. Some of the reasons gathered informally in 2013 was just tax of the region being averse to new taxes. At that time, there was no sunset clause on the tax.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what.
Sorry about that. Some of the voters felt that there was no need for an aquatic center, and then certainly there were concerns about this facility competing with the private fitness club industry in the Tri-Cities. Legislation was passed at the state level that would allow the Pasco Public Facilities District to move forward with an aquatic center vote on its own as an individual facilities district. Since the passage of since the RCWs enabled the Pasco Public Facilities District to move forward on its own, research and analysis has been conducted since 2019. There were revisions to an original master plan and feasibility study, and it outlined the size of the facility. It addressed some of the features that were originally proposed and really just made it a basic aquatic center so it wouldn't compete with private fitness club industry. And it looked at predictive costs adjusted for inflation. So if construction were to begin in 2023 or 2024, the numbers that the PFD could use to predict financial feasibility for the project were appropriate for the time when the construction would begin. The research and analysis also brought in a new timeline for a vote and if successful, planning and construction of the project, which we'll go into in a little bit. The public versus private markets. So a lot of the public had introduced, well, why is this the city's, well, the city is not doing it, but why would the public facilities do a publicly funded aquatic center? There's no indoor public pool. There are fitness clubs in the Tri-Cities, but typically membership or one-time fee to get in. But as far as a public pool offering inside and publicly funded, there is not one right now. It's difficult from a private sector perspective to fund the entire facility privately. There'd be a raising of a lot of liquid capital that would be needed. The private sector serves vastly different markets. The fitness club market is different than what would be conceivably the market for attending a public aquatic center. Profit-driven operations could limit universal program access. So what that means is, swimming lessons for kids in the community to foster safety may not be profit-driven. So affordable programs that are accessible and equitable to the public are built into this model. The buildings tend to be built with shorter usable lifespan, and membership-based usage really limits general community use. So that's some of the reasons why the Public Facilities District is taking up the charge to do this. Earlier in 2021, an independent third party to analyze the finances was hired by the PFD. This analysis went through 15 years of historic sales tax, which included the downturn in sales tax from the 2008 financial recession, and to really form a picture and to bring about some sound projections for the PFD to weigh this against. The analysis went over the predictive operations cost and revenue, and this came from the feasibility study that was revised in 2019, taking in gate revenues, people that would rent out the classroom, utilize the facility, purchase concessions, versus what a typical facility of this size would cost. And then financial analysis also looked at the timing of a bond, including the debt service to pay off the bond and the timeline and duration of the bond. So what it looked at was moving into some of the financials. The PFD could conceivably take on a $40 million bond at 5% interest. $2.8 million would be due yearly for the debt service on that bond, and it would be a 25-year lifespan on that bond, so a repayment period of that. So painting the picture for the financial analysis, I'd like to introduce Chairman Morissette to come up to the podium, and he can go a little bit deeper into the details on the finances. This is going to be a broad brush, so if council has any questions, we have lots of answers in our back pockets for you.
Good evening, Mr. Morissette.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Do I need to wear a mask or is it muffled?
Yeah, you have to keep it on.
You have to keep it on.
All right, that's fine. So tonight, as you mentioned, my name is Mark Morissette. I'm with the Pasco Public Facilities District. And I think it's first important to start out as to why we're here and what has brought us to this point. That there's really two reasons why the Pasco Public Facilities District pursued looking at this project. The first reason being that in 2013, it was 57% of the voters in Pasco were in favor of an aquatic center. And number two, we were quite concerned about the impact that it might have on private industry. And through the Ballot King
We're getting feedback. Go ahead.
That's okay. I thought Mr. Worley was repeating me. Through the Ballard King study, we learned that, as Mr. Mckay had mentioned before, that it's two markedly different markets, the public facility versus the private facilities. So we felt as though we should go ahead with it. So after several years of work, and some of us going back to being on the Public Facilities District since 2002, we make it to here. Now on the screen then, oops. Who's moving it, you or me, Zach? You are? Okay. No, doesn't matter to me. Okay, so the first screen here shows that there's a 25-year bond period, and there's $235 million of sales tax collections over that period of time. Just as you're buying a home and you pay a lot of interest over that 30-year mortgage, that's also what you're seeing here, a $40 million project for phase one. 25 years later, at what we say was 5% interest, $2.8 million annual payment. It requires some money to be collected. Now, phase one costs the $125 million, and that does include the subsidy, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And phase two costs, which Mr. Mckay mentioned, it was somewhere 12 to 15 years from the beginning, is where perhaps there'll be enough money accumulated to be able to bring in the competition pool. The Next line, operations facility subsidy from the city is zero. Really the only positive source of cash flow from this is going to be the sales tax collection, and that has to be spread around to many different areas. It has to obviously be the construction costs. It has to be the payback, that $2.8 million. And as far as the subsidy is concerned, there is enough increase in sales tax revenue. So the subsidy is going to be paid from the local sales tax, the 0.2%, and any sales tax collected greater than what it takes to pay the $2.8 million payment can be used for the operations subsidy. So because of that growth in sales tax, and it's, I think 4.9% is the estimate of what we think that may grow at, the sales tax collections. Because of that growth, then there won't be any reliance for the facility to have to look towards the city to subsidize the effort. Now, the phase one, for example, the phase one part, which is the immediate upfront project, that it's going to require a 19% subsidy. So what that means is it's a little different than in the for-profit world, where you have the income minus the expenses, and then you have the net income. Instead, the phrase that's used, it seems like a lot in government, is something called cost recovery. So the cost in this project, for example, to operate phase one is approximately $2 million a year. And of that $2 million a year cost, approximately 81% of that will be recovered through the gates. The other 19% has to come from somewhere. And again, the only positive source of cash flow for the aquatic center is going to be the sales tax collections. So then that means that that subsidy is going to have to come from the sales tax collections, the growth. Phase two, with the competitive pool, is a project that does not have the cost recovery to it as, say, for example, the phase one. So the cost recovery for the phase two is going to be 46% of the cost, which means 54% of the costs have to be recovered from somewhere else. And again, not having to look at the city to subsidize this effort, we're going to have to look towards the sales tax collections. And then in the lower, or the right part there, there's kind of this question that always gets dealt with. Well, what does 0.2% look like? So they're on the bottom on $10, a $10 sale in the city of Pasco is going to generate 2 cents of sales tax for the Public Facilities District. $100 is going to generate 20 cents. $1,000 is going to generate $2, and $100,000 is going to generate $200. And of course, the importance of this down at the bottom, total remaining cash balance, $85 million. 25 years from now, we don't know what this project is going to, the aquatic center is going to look like. It's probably going to need some refurbishment, some replacement, or perhaps some additional amenities added to the aquatic center. And it's the hope of the Pasco Public Facilities District that this is the kind of an effort that is going to be for generations to come. Not just a 25-year period, but a long time. And here is a slide going through what we analyzed and the assumptions. And what I want to just point out here is that, as already been mentioned before, is the 4.9% annualized gross sales tax, which is, and you can see in parentheses, our middle of the road prediction, and that $2.8 million annual debt service. This slide, the second line down under findings. Upon election, the Pasco Public Facilities District starts collecting that 0.2% sales tax. which takes us to this slide. So how is it, and this was something I worked through my mind quite a while to try to understand this, because it didn't make sense to me. And then there was a gentleman who we refer to as the Mr. Nolan report, and Mr. Mckay picked this up faster than I did. But when you look at this chart, you're going to see that in year one, that the sales tax collections start. But during year one, there's just the bond sale. It's that $475,000. And over here to the right, see the bond startup cost, the $475,000. It would be nice if that $40,000 could go immediately to the Public Facilities District, but there are some costs that have to be dealt with to place that size of an offer. There's bond counsel, financial advisor, the Department of Commerce has a feasibility review process, an underwriting fee, and the city attorney fee. So because of that, we start with the sales tax collections, but in the year one, the bond sale and management, the $475,000, the $2 million of land purchase, that if you drop down to the very bottom and see that ending cash balance of $1,145,000, so it's actually the first year that allows for the excess sales tax collections to where the project doesn't have to look for some sort of a subsidy outside of the district. And I remember, Mr. Mayor, you mentioning that you had a jam-packed agenda, and I was going to say something like, we'll try to be out of here about 9:30. We're almost to the end.
All right.
So, of course, with every project, intending and planning and hoping for some jobs creation. And you can see phase one, 16 employees, 6 full-time, 10 part-time. Phase two, full-time, 1 individual, 3 part-time, for a grand total of 4. So that would be a grand total of 20 for the entire project by the time phase 2 happens in 12 to 15 years. So for the district, and then we'll get to the questions or discussion that you may have. Our next step is going to be at our next board meeting, is that we're going to discuss a resolution and vote on that resolution to come up with the ballot language to place this on the February 3rd, 2020 election. So with that, that finishes up my part, unless there's anything. Mr. Mckay or Mr. Ferguson, is there anything you need to add to what I've said?
No. Thank you, Chairman Morissette, and Eric and I are, City Attorney Ferguson and I are here along with Chairman Morissette and the board for any questions of council.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. Council, is there any, I know I do, but I'd like to hear, anybody else have any questions or comments for Mr. Morissette or our staff?
Yes, Councilmember Maloney, I can kick it off.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Martinez, and thank you, Director Mckay and Mr. Morissette for the presentation. Obviously, I've been intimately involved and engaged with this for a long time, so I know that I've got a burden of a whole lot of information behind the scenes that really support this. But I think the real conclusions that I think that summarize what I think I just saw, and I hope everyone take away, is this project can be entirely self-funding. It can not only be a large aquatics facility, a water park, but also expand into something this region needs for tourism and sports tourism, for a competition pool. And I think it'll be a shining star for what the Tri-Cities needs as a whole, but really what Pasco's been asking for. I mean, this is the number one thing I hear from any average person in Pasco is, why can't we have more things for kids to do? So anyways, I continue to be emphatically supportive of giving the voters an opportunity to vote on this, and I think that's what the Pasco PFD is going to do. And I'm just really excited. It's taken a long time to get here, a lot of hours, a lot of energy, and a lot of patience. And appreciate, Mr. Morissette, your service and the service of the other board members.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Councilman Serrano. I know one of the big asks that I've heard from folks is about kind of the timing, right? We're talking at a 15 or 20-year lag potentially between building phase 1 and phase 2. Aside from getting more people in or increasing the tax dollar or the bondability, I mean, one, can we increase the bond number? And two, would we be able to compensate for that with either a higher tax or something of that nature to get these two phases closer together?
Well, I think that the answer to that question is pretty complex compared to what we've done for the future projections, Councilman Serrano. So we can certainly get that question tracked down for you and weigh some different scenarios and come back with that.
I'll say this, I'm not advocating for either. I don't want to see an even greater increase in tax. I don't think anyone wants to. But I do think that phase 2 component, as Councilman Maloney mentioned, that's a huge component of sports tourism. I don't know. I'd have to look back at it. I wonder if there's a use for the hotel motel tax on something like that. Just looking at other alternative revenue sources that we might be able to pull that are already existing. And again, we'd all have to look at the statute. Eric's probably happy because at least he'll be able to turn his lights on for another month if we have to chase this. But, this is a very complex question you said. So anyway, just kind of my musings as far as the project's great, but I think phase 2 is very critical to the success of it. And I'll just leave it at that.
So may I add to that? So, Councilman Serrano, we asked the Ballard King people to take a look at the amenities in this project and rank them in terms of which ones are higher revenue producing, lower cost, or lower revenue, higher cost. And so in the Ballard King study, there's actually a chart that lists those amenities. And that's why you can kind of see in the phase 1 was intended to go more with the less subsidy, which is that 19% subsidy number, as opposed to when you start moving into phase 2, which is the competitive pool, then that revenue cost ratio changes significantly. I don't know if that helps, but
no, I definitely appreciate that. I think holistically on the large scale picture, to the extent that we have that second component, if we're able to host lots of events, especially if we're talking an indoor aquatic pool competition size, we could be that, northeastern Oregon, southeastern and central Washington hub. And obviously I'm sure the Ballard folks have looked at that. Again, these are kind of just my personal thoughts on what I think bring value. Again, puts people in hotels, spending money in at restaurants, aside from just popping in for half a day or whatever the case is.
sure. So phase 1 is more of what I would describe as an economics approach, as opposed to phase 2 seems to be more of a community popular approach. I'm not saying it's not important, because they're very important to the community, and we learned an awful lot about the need for these indoor pools. And that's why we recognized that we weren't going to exclude it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. Anyone else? Councilmember Alvarado.
Just curious about some of the projections for construction and land purchase. Are those thinking the same ratio that our costs have grown in the past few years, or is there kind of a little bit of just some projections there?
Let's see here. You'll move back. So the one I'm looking for is the 40 million, and then it gets down to the 33 for the facility cost. Here you go. These costs, of course, even as of right now, are outdated probably. But the initial bond proceeds, the 40 million, and then by the time we subtract off what it takes to start breaking the ground to start putting up a facility. You can see it goes from 40 million and it drops already down, all the way down to 33 million. Hoping those costs, these numbers are fairly reasonable. Can they change? Are they likely to change? Yes. But this is the initial starting point.
And if I can
You
jump
know,
in,
also, may I say this, Councilman Alvarado? You know, I'm hoping that, so this information is going to be provided to the voters, it's available to the voters, it's available to the pro and con committee. And even as this project, if there's a successful vote on this, then keep in mind that we hope that these become the budget numbers. It's not something we dismiss as what we did back in 2021. And what was the date? Did you say 2024 is the first?
yeah, on these costs that came from our from the master plan study that the PFD worked through, the predicted construction costs were based on a 2023 inflation. Now this was done in 2019, so obviously inflation numbers can fluctuate a little bit. The initial land costs are, you know, sort of ballpark predictive for that, but based upon today's numbers. And of course, we know that land rises as well. So these numbers, the PFD will be looking in far greater detail depending upon the result of the election in February. But we were, the PFD was basing it on the predictive 2023 inflationary numbers. So that is worked in there a little bit. But as Chairman Morissette says, it's hard to predict at times, but greater scrutiny certainly to those numbers depending upon the result of the election.
And you can see the first year of operations is 2024. So it's still out there a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think knowing that we don't have a silver ball, but we do know inflation, and we do know a few things. So I appreciate seeing some thought.
Sure. You know, I appreciate your question because, irregardless, our work, we still have to come up with some sort of numbers to be able to discuss this. So it's a good question.
Is it all you had? All right, thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Mr. Morissette, I still, in all the years of community service that I've put in, I don't think my heart was broken more than when the Regional Facilities District's attempt to try to pass this the first time didn't go, especially since seeing Pasco had a majority of the vote and then Richland and Kennewick didn't. It was devastating for me a little bit because I just knew it was something that could have been done. We could have had something going by now. My question to you, and I'm really excited about this, and I really hope that we can, I'm an advocate for this, and I know how much work has been put into it by you, Mr. Dietrich, and the others on the commission. You can't leave until this gets done, okay? Just for the record. So anyway, but my question, and one of the
I don't know if you want to see me at this aquatic center in my swimming suit.
Well, you can just be there in a chair watching everybody else. But I know that a part of the issue and one of the struggles we had is and I didn't see it up there, where the sales tax for the other cities were versus Pasco. That wasn't on the charts there, correct?
Say that again?
The sales tax rate for the Kennewick, Richland, and Pasco.
Yes.
So if this was to actually go through, are we going to be 0.2% above the other cities? I'm not sure where we're at with the other cities and the sales tax.
So the answer is yes.
We will be 0.2% above the other cities,
Yes.
Yes.
roughly. And and the whole thing here is I'm really excited, or I'm really in favor of the sales tax, because that way those who are coming in, along with our citizens, those that are coming in from out of town to use our facilities, will be paying this and be assisting in paying into this, correct? So I'm in favor of funding this through the sales tax. I know that some of the struggle is, where people would have second thoughts. I mean, to me, 0.2% isn't, a deal breaker, but maybe for others it might be. But that's the hope, the hope that, we can get over that hurdle so that, and understand that it's not just our citizens, but anybody who spends money in the city of Pasco will be participating in paying for this, and supporting this cause here, right?
Yes.
So, anyway, that's just one of the concerns I had, and I don't know where the other cities are as far as, their 0.2% and whether or not they're gonna pass something that would be, make us equitable again. I guess that's just the biggest struggle is people might in their minds think that it's a little bit higher than the other cities, so they might refrain from, wanting to come and spend money here.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I make my living as a CPA, and I tell you, it is a big gulp for me to read that the collections are gonna be $235 million. So I'm a free enterprise, capitalistic kind of a person. So it does concern me, but also I recognize that if private industry builds this, there's still going to be the same amount of money that is probably going to be needed to generate a private facility or a public facility. Can't say with certainty, but it's going to be there. Now, just a minute here. Now, you see the second bullet, public versus private markets, and difficult to fund entire facility privately. So there's an August 20th, 2020 meeting where we had a banker come and talk to us about a private facility building an aquatic center and the challenges that are with it. And there was quite a list from the banking, creditors, credit granting industry as to what would be their concerns. And of course, when we looked into the numbers that were presented to us from Ballot King, and we're talking about these 19% overall, 19% phase one, and I don't remember already the number, it was what, 54% for phase two? Those are pretty big numbers. And obviously people in private industry can't afford to fund that kind of a project unless they have awfully deep pockets, and they probably aren't going to want to continue funding for that long period of time. Going back, so you were on, I can't remember, you were on the council, or were you also on the Regional Public Facilities District Board?
I was also on the Regional Facilities District Board.
Okay. So at the time, I was on the Pasco Public Facilities District Board, and I represented us to the meetings, and so I would attend the meetings. So this is going to be my own personal observation, not the board's, but my own personal observation from going to the meetings. So you see the second bullet, and it's okay I do that, isn't it, Mr. Ferguson, my own personal? I won't get too deep.
I'm sorry, so what was the question?
Well, I want to share what my personal observation of back in 2013 to try to answer Mayor Martinez's question.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know if you remember this, but one of the problems, and I think it was the big problem back in 2013, was the discussion of the sunset clause on the tax.
Yep.
And so, help me, Mr. Ferguson. So now what's happened, though, the RCWs have cleaned that up. And so in this ballot measure, there will be no sunset.
Sure. Would you like me to expand on it a little bit?
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay. So the statute that we're under for this particular tax, it does not have a requirement that the tax be sunset, the 0.2% that the district can go up to ask the voters to go up to. There doesn't appear to be anything to prohibit it, but there is nothing in the statute that says that the tax has to be sunsetted, which is different than the other PFD statute that we currently are under for the regional facility. So this, as currently being considered by the board, is not being proposed to sunset, and so it would be perennial, and it would not have a particular sunset date to it that the tax would go away. The board obviously could at any time pass a resolution to decide to retire the tax, but that's a decision that a board much further down the road would have to do. Obviously, the bonds, they couldn't do that during the period at which the bonds are still being repaid, but a board in the future could decide to retire that tax, but the way it's currently being proposed is not with the sunset provision.
So then, Mayor Martinez, because it was difficult in 2013 to deal with that, I think that was a big problem for the voters. Okay. But now it's been dealt with, and as Mr. Ferguson has mentioned, we want this project to be for generations to come. There's going to be costs down the road. How's it going to be dealt with? And these RCWs now tidy that up to where it's clear with regarding the no sunset, and there's going to be a future need out there. And how's it going to get funded? Because you don't want to close it.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Morissette, for Mr. Dietrich and everybody on the board. I appreciate your efforts and time. We're looking forward to, you said you were going to go back for to work up a resolution, and we'll be looking forward to seeing what's next.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ratke. Next, we'll move on to item B, which is the 2022 legislative priorities. Mr. Lincoln, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This evening, we're going to be joined by one of our lobbyists, Holly Kochi, who's going to walk us through a little bit about the upcoming short session. She'll give a little bit of detail about how that session works and how it's a little different from last year's or this year's session earlier in the year. And then she's also going to go through the draft agenda items for the upcoming session and ask for feedback from council. So with that, I'll turn it over to Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Lincoln, and good evening, Ms. Kochi.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, you're coming in loud and clear.
Excellent. Okay, so good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. Again, my name is Holly Kochi. I work with Brianna Murray as the city's lobbyist in Olympia. Typically, you have both Brianna and I. However, Brianna is unable to attend this evening as she is taking some much-deserved time off. And she'll be returning later this week, but you will have me today. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So I will do my best to be succinct, as I know you all have other items to cover tonight. But to begin, I plan to provide an overview of what to expect this legislative session, and then go through the draft legislative agenda document and support opposed document, which I will walk through in detail. And once we go over the agenda, we will work on getting these finalized with the goal to meet with our 16th and 9th legislative delegation well in advance of session to brief them on the city's priorities and move forward on advocating for these items as soon as possible. So with that all in mind, if you could go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So an overview of what to expect this session. This is the second year of the 2-year biennium, meaning the legislature runs on a 2-year cycle. And I would regret reminding everyone that the city was extremely successful during the first year of the biennium in accomplishing several priorities, including a significant capital budget appropriation for the MLK Center renovations, the establishment of the Industrial Symbiosis Grant Program to assist in the progress of the city's processed water reuse facility, funding for the Ryman Industrial Center, as well as the Tri-Cities Behavioral Health Facility, and the inclusion of the 3 transportation projects within the House and Senate's most recent draft transportation revenue package proposals. So we are coming off a significant year of success. With that success, however, legislators have also indicated that we should lower our expectations for this upcoming session because the first year of the biennium was so full of activity. This next session is, so the shorter session of the 2, like I said, lasting 60 days and beginning on January 10th. The Democrats continue to hold the majority in both chambers. And following the 2022 legislative session, half the members of the Senate and all members of the House will be seeking re-election in November of 2022 from the new redistricting boundaries that will be proposed by the Redistricting Commission in November of this year. Through the redistricting process, the city has weighed in as they redraw the boundaries by sending letters to the commission and providing public comment throughout. Another point to add is that given that re-elections will immediately occur after the 2022 legislative session, it is likely that controversial issues will not advance. As of today, we are unsure whether the session will be virtual, in person, or some sort of hybrid of the 2. But I assure you, both Brianna and I are well prepared to be your advocates in whatever format they choose. At this point, we have experience in both elements, so we are prepared to tackle what is to come, whatever that may be. And we can go to the next slide. So typically during a short session, the legislature will focus on creating supplemental budgets that make amendments and modifications to the budgets that were passed during the previous session. For the operating budget, they have received some positive revenue forecasts recently showing ample funding for that budget. So we're not anticipating any budget shortfalls or any budget cuts. If anything, there may be budget adds. The capital and transportation budgets are both a bit of a different story, as they are quite constrained in comparison to the operating budget. The capital has about 80 million in bond capacity reserved from last year, and the transportation budget has long been limited on funding and really will continue to be constrained, leading us to the lengthy conversation that the legislature has been having regarding a transportation revenue package. And in addition to developing the supplemental budgets, the legislature will continue any bills, or will consider any bills that were introduced but did not pass last session. And they are also able to introduce any new legislation. And as I shared earlier, it isn't likely that highly controversial issues will be taken up this session with re-elections around the corner, but issues around a transportation revenue package, the state long-term care plan, police reform clarifications, and many others will likely be hot topics for the legislature to discuss this session. Next slide, please. Okay, so before I begin going through the draft legislative agenda for your consideration, I'll just note this agenda reflects the conversations Brianna and I have had with city staff and what we believe to be the most palatable to accomplish or make progress on during the upcoming session. But at the end of the day, this is your legislative agenda, and we welcome any feedback you may have. Additionally, keeping in mind the hundreds of other issues the city is likely to take interest in and would like to weigh in on during the session, we have a second document that captures the city's support opposed list, which provides city staff, along with Brianna and I, the direction we need to advocate for the city's positions during stakeholder groups, at committee hearings, and other scenarios, while still really keeping the city's legislators hyper-focused on those top priorities within the legislative agenda. So with that, I will address the first item on the agenda, which is the downtown Pasco investments. This would be a $250,000 capital budget request to make improvements to downtown Pasco for signage, walkability, street furniture, lighting, and other community amenities. Our 16th legislators in particular, as well as the 9th, have been very helpful in investing in Pasco's downtown area to date, and this would be a continuation of those efforts. The next priority on the agenda is transportation funding for 4 projects within Pasco. And before I cover those, I'll just quickly touch on the development of the next transportation revenue package, which it isn't new for anyone to hear on the council given our efforts from last year, but the development of a transportation revenue package really only occurs every 5, 10, 12 years at a time. And it's the opportunity to advance transportation requests that would otherwise exceed the capacity of a biennial transportation budget. So the priorities on the document here are capitalizing and taking advantage of the opportunity ahead of us. Last legislative session, the city had a few transportation requests. Given the continual dialogue around a revenue package, we recommend the city carry over 2 of the requests from last year, which is State Route 395 Sylvester Bike Ped Crossing for $4 million, and State Route 12 safety improvements, which we worked with our 16th district legislators and WSDOT to refine the project over the interim, making it a $1.5 million request for design to address safety solutions at 2 at-grade crossings. For State Route 12, once the design is completed, we will still need to secure construction funding. However, we do not have any construction estimates at this time, so it's most prudent to proceed forward with the request for the design funding. So last legislative session, we had a 3rd request, which was State Route 395 Oregon Avenue overlay. And the city was actually able to secure grant funding for this project. So we no longer need to include this as an agenda item. So instead, there are 2 additional requests that have been included in this year's agenda. So the first being a $3 million request for Broadmoor Bike Ped crossing over the I-82 interchange, and the second being a $2 million request to complete an access revision report to allow eastbound access on I-82 from the area north of the interchange. So to recap, we will have 4 transportation funding requests that will rely on a transportation funding package to have a chance to receive funding. The next item is one that was included in our previous legislative agenda, which is continuing work on the processed water reuse facility. We know we will have a large request associated with improvements to the processed water reuse facility in the coming years. So this continues to be a project we are requesting the state's partnership in and really laying the groundwork for, but not advancing a specific request for the 2022 session. The next item is water rights availability. This is really calling on the city to engage what already is an existing robust policy discussion on how to increase water rights for municipalities. One of those suggestions we will be advocating for during session is the concept that existing groundwater rights, when permitted for irrigation of an industrial wastewater facility, are able to be converted into municipal water rights. The Association of Washington Cities has been leading this issue. We have had a meeting with Public Works Director Steve Worley and the association to elevate this issue, and we would continue to do so through our advocacy efforts. So we don't envision this this priority being we're leading it and drafting it, but rather actively supporting the effort as it moves through the legislative process. The next item includes 2 options for council's consideration. One is a broad statement of support for mental health and treatment funding. And the language you see for that on the screen is very similar to what was included in last year's legislative agenda. So at a broader level, this really calls on the state to increase funding for mental health and substance abuse treatment services. The second calls out wanting the legislature to authorize cities to impose a 0.1% councilmanically if they are located in a county that has otherwise chosen not to pass the tax. So if you all decide to select this statement as a priority, we would recommend moving it up above the transportation project section, and you would be supporting along with other communities, but really this would be led by Pasco and would be a request that Brianna and I, as your city advocates, would be working on a bill draft, identifying bill sponsors, and having city staff testify in support. If we were to be successful in this effort, the expectation by the legislature would be that Pasco would then impose this tax. So 2 options there, and picking one depends on kind of where we will put it on the priorities list. The final agenda item is a statement around public safety. As you all are probably aware, the legislature passed a dozen different police reform bills, and this is a statement to revisit some of those proposals to provide clarity on application across the state to maintain public safety. I'll just note the Attorney General's office received several requests for clarification on several of the reforms and is currently working on those. We expect to see some of those available beginning of the 2022 session. Those AGO opinions are likely to inform specific clarification on bills for the legislative session, and as those bills come forward, we will be reviewing them with the police chief and the city attorney and proactively responding to them. Additionally, today, just this morning, there was a discussion between various stakeholders and the House Public Safety Committee to go over possible clarifications that will be prioritized for this next session. So we think a broad statement such as this adequately prepares the city to respond to any legislation that may come about from the AGO's feedback and how the legislature takes action, however that may look. So on the next page is the city support oppose monitor list from last year with with track changes showing the suggested revisions for this upcoming session. So to go over the significant changes very quickly, we removed the COVID-19 funding statement since their work on that was primarily addressed during the 2021 session. We are anticipating other cities to lead the effort in supporting proposals around public bidding, and we would like to share our support for that as well. We have indicated support for Complete Streets grant funding since the city is in the process of working on applying for that grant right now. Our understanding is that there is a regional conversation developing over the third crossing over the Columbia River. So this is a statement sharing the city's support for that. We've added the Public Works Assistance Account, which we've had this statement in years past, but did not include in the last year's support oppose monitor list, which was really just an oversight. So it has been re-added. We removed Main Street tax credit, the tax credit incentive program, since that was adopted last session. And Pasco is working with neighboring jurisdictions on. The city would like to see grant funding available for that work. The legislature took action last session on social and criminal justice reform, and now it is time to revisit those which we highlighted in our legislative priorities statement above under the public safety section. So this statement has been adjusted to reflect social justice reform as the other priority above addresses criminal justice aspects. A statement has been added regarding monitoring any Growth Management Act proposals. We are anticipating a robust discussion around GMA and ask that any planning obligations are coupled with adequate funding. So that concludes our legislative agenda and support oppose monitor list draft for this upcoming session. If you have any thoughts, please let me know. And as always, you can reach Brianna and I via email or phone if you have any questions or feedback that you think of after this meeting, but happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Holly. Thank you for that presentation, and it looks good on my behalf. Council, any questions or comments for Holly tonight?
Yes, Councilman Serrano. In looking at basically public safety and land use, we moved from like a support oppose to kind of more of a statement than what our position is. I mean, specifically crisis response team. I had to read that a couple times to really get the meat of that. And it seems that our leading statement that we encourage or support the state's continued grant funding on crisis response team. So again, I think if we could flip that statement, it'd be helpful. Similarly on the Growth Management Act, I think that too, if we could flip that statement that supports or maybe just requests the accompanied funding, I think that'd be helpful to really understand where it's coming from.
Okay,
and
great.
then the last one, can you talk me through social justice and what exactly our state social justice system is?
I'd be happy to follow up with you just at top of mind to just share with you exactly what I think they're going to be addressing. I'm uncertain at this point. I think they're really honing in on what our main priority point on police reform. I think that's what they're really addressing. I will say that that conversation also loops in mental health facilities and providing funding to assist with cities who want to create a facility or behavioral health programs. So that kind of loops into social justice, I would say. But other specific examples, I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay. From my perspective, before I could support that statement, I need more information. As it reads, I don't believe I can support it.
Okay, council member, I've noted your points on those three, and I'll loop back with Dave and Adam on that, and we'll revise accordingly. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. Anybody else for Holly?
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Yeah, I just wanted to address, I guess, very specifically, we have an or, so I think we probably need some discussion on what or we'd like to go down. At this time, I would recommend that we keep a generalized, we continue to keep a generalized request as opposed to a specific authorization for imposing a mental health sales tax and use councilmanically. I think that right now we have the availability of some of the ARPA funding, and I think we're having a much more robust conversation across our community about mental health services. And so, Benton County is taking a role in trying to figure out if we can find what sort of facility we might be able to secure. And so I think I think right now, I think we should focus on the more generalized one as opposed to specifically asking for authorization to increase sales tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. Anyone else? All right, well, Holly, thank you very much for your presentation, and we're looking forward. And again, I'd just like to appreciate all the work that you and Brianna and others do on our behalf here in Pasco. I know we had a very successful year, so thank you so much, and we'll be keeping in touch.
Mayor.
Of course, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing.
No, you're fine. If I could just clarify, we had one comment on the 1/10. Is that it would be helpful to have a couple more voices weigh in on whether or not staff knows which item to select on the or section.
Okay.
But I appreciate the comments.
Hey, this is Councilman Melny. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'd be for holding off on when we talk about adding a 1% tax, considering we'd like to see how the vote goes with the voters as far as on the aquatic center. I think to have two taxes at the same time is quite a lot, so I would prefer to hold off on that for another year before moving forward. That's my 2 cents.
I thank you, Councilmember Melny. Anyone else?
Not hearing anyone in favor, we'll go ahead
Yeah,
and keep it at the other or.
this is Serrano. I will echo that. I think we'd be hard pressed. I mean, we're only talking 3/10 of 1%, or a small. If both taxes pass, a small portion. Nonetheless, I mean, I certainly don't think it flies if we have two measures possibly coming out either on the same ballot if this were to come as early as February, or if it waited until the summer, a ballot and then a subsequent ballot. I think that just kind of looks bad. So I think we'd be hard pressed to see success requesting for that second one. So I'm with Councilman Millie. I think that's a good salient point.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Serrano. And good enough?
All good, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lincoln. All right, well, thank you once again, Holly.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, next we'll move on to the next item, and that would be sponsorship agreement for utility box wraps with STCU. And tonight we have our Angela Pashan.
Yes, good evening.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good. So tonight we, before you have a draft resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a sponsorship agreement with Spokane Teachers Credit Union, or STCU, for art wraps of utility boxes. And utility box wraps have been shown to deter graffiti and other damage while bringing life to ordinary equipment in surrounding areas. In August of 2019, STCU did come to council and provide a presentation of the surrounding cities, Kennewick and Richland program, as well as Spokane and Liberty Lake. And at the time, council discussed and was very positive of the program. However, there was discussion about creating an arts and culture commission at the time. And it was decided to hold off and allow that to form, which it has been formed now for a little over a year. And with that, let's see here. Sorry about that. Over the past several months, the Pasco Arts and Culture Commissioner, what we call PAC for short, has been discussing an STCU program and what it would look like. The sponsorship agreement outlines that STCU will provide not only the funding for the fabrication and installation, but also the art stipend that goes along with the art program. The city would be responsible for the selection, review, inspection of materials, installation, and for providing cost estimates for the program itself to STCU. STCU would take care of any boxes that are damaged or need to be replaced. And the PAC views this proposal favorably and would really like to start with their first wave. And it's anticipated that they would do an annual program for Call for Art for 4 box wraps a year. This initial year, STCU has indicated they would actually do 6 box wraps. So the proposal in front of you is for your consideration.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate this very much. I've seen them in other cities, and I'm really jealous about it. And I am looking forward to having this, and I'm going to be an advocate for passing this. Any Councilmember Alvarado?
Yes, thank you. I'm definitely in favor of this. It's great to see this come to as a program or even as a partnership. I'm curious if there's been any thought to creating an avenue for folks to do this kind of work independently of STCU. Let's say a private developer wanted to do this and wrap their boxes with something that's not necessarily branded to a credit union. Do we have an avenue for that?
You know, we actually we haven't discussed that to this program itself, but I would definitely work with our Community and Economic Development Director to find out where we would need to go with that. The Arts and Culture Commission would be where we would recommend the developers or private individuals would come kind of present those projects to and help either, we've learned a lot, staff has learned a lot just from having the diversity of different art professionals and artists on this commission. So that hasn't been discussed at this time.
And as a follow-up to that, did the commission come up with any restrictions as far as the size of the branding versus the size of the art?
It will fall in line with, I can defer to Director White if needed, but we have worked with Director White in regards to it will be a very small portion. If you've seen the ones over in Kennewick and Richland, it's sometimes very hard to even see that the STCU logo is on there.
Yeah, and I certainly want to be clear that I'm very much in favor. I really appreciate this partnership. Just making sure I was due diligence questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Then we'll look forward to seeing it in next week's agenda. Thank you, Angela. All right. Next, we'll go to item D, the Lewis Street corridor update by Mckay Sposito. Mr. Worley, would you like to kick us off with that, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening, we are going to have a presentation on the Lewis Street Corridor project, and I'm going to turn this project over to our senior engineer, John Pedforic.
Hello, John. Good evening.
Mayor Pro Tem, and Council, thanks for having us here tonight to talk about the Lewis Corridor project. We're excited to be here to present this project. There's a lot of great work the city's put into some adjacent projects, and this will really connect the work we've been doing for a long time and complete the revitalization of the downtown core. Next slide. In this presentation tonight, we'll have a general overview of the project so that everyone is aware of where we're working on the project and what our goals are. And we have developed, as a team between the city and Mckay Sposito, some alternatives, and we'll look at those and discuss the pros and cons of a few different alternatives that were also shared with the community. And then we'll also talk about the public engagement we have done to date to get feedback from different interest groups in the community and report back in terms of what people are interested in seeing for this project. Next slide. So my name is John Padvorak. I'm a senior civil engineer with the City of Pasco, and I'm the project manager for this project.
Good evening. My name is Jason Irving with Mckay Sposito, and as a Pasco-based consulting firm, I'd just like to take a moment to thank the city for the opportunity to work on this community-facing project, and I'll be the project manager for the consulting team. And with us tonight as well, we have Brian Cole, who with Mckay Sposito, who leads our Pasco office. And on the phone, we have Alma Villegas with AV Consulting. She's the engagement lead for the consultant team. Massa Eshke with Mckay Sposito, who's our deputy project manager and the design lead, as well as Brian Chandler with DKS Associates, who's providing the traffic engineering and safety analysis. Next slide, please. Thank you.
So for this project, we'll be connecting the Lewis Street Overpass project with Peanuts Park and carrying through improvements of a similar flavor to what we see in both those two projects and connecting those physically in terms of ADA accessibility, pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements, and also aesthetically by taking key elements from both those projects and building it through the corridor to really make it look like a holistically improved corridor. Regarding funding, the project is currently partially funded. We have community development block grant funding, as well as direct appropriation funding from the state budget. And regarding schedule, our current goal is to go out to bid such that the construction could occur next summer. And the reason for that is that that would coincide with when the Lewis Overpass construction is occurring. And so we can have those two events occur together and then have construction be complete so businesses can have an end to the season of construction and go back to business. So this project has several goals. It's a great opportunity to do an improvement in the downtown core that satisfies a lot of needs and desires of both the community and business owners and building owners, and really find something that works for everybody and makes everybody have an easier time and a better time in downtown Pasco. There's a lot of things to balance, a lot of sometimes competing interests. There's economic revitalization in terms of creating a project that helps our local businesses succeed and helps local business people around the Tri-Cities area see reason to invest in downtown Pasco. We really want to honor the culture of downtown Pasco and take that into consideration in terms of how we incorporate that into the architecture of the project. The downtown core is a great area for festivals and events, and we want to make sure that what we build for everyday use is also suitable for those activities. And also keep in the front of our minds accessibility and safety for all sorts of people and all modes of transportation to move us towards a more accessible and safe city.
Great, thank you, John. So talking a little bit about the project needs and what this project will address. So currently, Lewis Street downtown lacks bicycle facilities. And as you can see in the photos here, some of the infrastructure is really, it's older and it's just getting a bit tired. And that includes pavement cracking. There's an old patchwork of cracked and non-ADA compliant sidewalks, as well as pedestrian ramps at the intersections. There's insufficient street lighting, which presents a safety challenge, as well as there's poor street tree health. So you'll see on this picture on the right, a lot of the trees downtown really they're getting kind of past their age, and they're a little bit too large for the available space. So this project, as part of the improvements, will replace those street trees as well as provide supplemental landscaping.
So there's a number of things that led to us being here today presenting this project. A lot of it starts with work a long time ago from other people who had visions of the city in mind and all the puzzle pieces in place in terms of figuring out what needs to be constructed where. There's a complete streets ordinance from 2016. It was updated in 18 that focuses on multimodal transportation and accessibility for all sorts of transportation modes, be it pedestrian, bicycles, and cars. Council goals also get into that area a little bit. Comprehensive plan goals, and one of the key documents is a 2011 bike and pedestrian master plan, where this is identified bicycle route. And then also connecting with the bicycle improvements built on the Lewis Street overpass, which was built with bicycle lanes, and the transportation system master plan, and making sure that all these planning documents that a lot of holistic thinking went into fit with how we build this piece of those puzzles.
Great. So with all downtown or many downtown projects such as the Lewis Street corridor, it's important to first kind of talk about the existing conditions because these projects tend to have fairly constrained right-of-way, and you're trying to fit a number of needs within an existing space. So the current conditions, this upper photo is a picture looking east from 4th Avenue. The existing conditions have about an 80-foot available right-of-way, and that, again, those buildings are basically right, in many places, right up against the sidewalk. Currently, there's approximately 15-foot wide sidewalks on each side of the roadway, 8-foot parallel parking stalls on each side of the roadway, as well as approximately 17.5-foot travel lanes, 2 of those, 1 in each direction. All right, so as the first step in the project, the team developed 3 alternatives to take a look at, and really and completed what we call an alternatives analysis. So we really assessed the pros and cons and looked at the different aspects of those projects. So some of the things we considered in this alternatives analysis were, of course, looking at the comparable costs of each alternative, also balancing transportation priorities between vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. And again, considering the available right-of-way, we talked a little bit about that 80-foot constrained right-of-way, and looking at the proposed elements that will fit in that right-of-way, such as parking, street furnishing, sidewalks, and of course the vehicle travel lanes. And then our subconsultant, DKS Associates, also completed traffic operations and safety analysis. And a few items that they looked at are the need, or that they identified through that analysis, are the need for enhanced pedestrian treatments at intersections in the form of sidewalk bulb outs, additional lighting, and textured crosswalks to produce or to increase pedestrian safety, traffic calming to reduce vehicle speeds, of course ADA improvements along the corridor, as well as increased corridor lighting. So the table at the bottom of this slide, the entire alternatives analysis was included in the packet, but this is just a summary table that talks about kind of the different aspects for each option that were looked at, and which of those aspects each of the options addressed. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the exciting part. We get to start talking about, all right, what could downtown look like? What are the options that we're taking a look at? But first, we want to talk a little bit about the common improvements. So each of the 3 alternatives provided for all of the following aspects here, and that is a multimodal transportation corridor, a high focus on maintaining on-street parking, again, ADA accessibility, restoring some of that cracked pavement downtown, again, replacing street trees and providing landscaping, enhanced bike and pedestrian safety, which was a top priority in the online survey that we completed that Alma will talk about a little bit later, new street tree lighting, and then traffic calming. So each alternative addresses each of these. Next slide, please. All right, so option 1, this is kind of really what we would consider a traditional multimodal corridor. And it provides for 15-foot sidewalks on each side of the roadway, which is similar to the existing condition. It's consistent, it has a very consistent look and layout with the Lewis Street overpass, which is currently under construction. And basically, the bike lane is set between the parallel parking and the vehicle lanes. But it is worth noting, and this is, this is a potential concern with lots of corridors and lots of cities.
that locating those bicycle lanes right next to those parked cars does create the potential for what we call dooring, right? So somebody pulls in, they go to get out of their car, maybe not looking in the rearview mirror or the side mirror, and they potentially open their car door right into a bicyclist. So a typical safety concern, but certainly worth noting. Next slide, please. And you'll see with each of these options, the team put together some renderings just to kind of give you a visual of what it might look under a festival street condition. Next slide, please. All right, so option 2 places a higher priority on the available sidewalk width. So basically, this provides a 20-foot sidewalk on both sides of the roadway by locating the bicycles in a shared lane with the traveling vehicles. And you'll see what's called bicycle sharrows, basically painted striping in the middle of the lanes that indicates to drivers, vehicle drivers, that those bicycles are sharing that lane. And this is typically a treatment you'll see in a lower speed corridor, such as downtown Pasco. And it is important to note too, with this option, because the bicycle lanes are sharing that travel lane with vehicles, it is a reduced bicycle safety situation, and there's a potential for more conflicts between those bicycles and traveling vehicles. Next slide, please. And again, this is just a visual of what the street might look like under option 2 under a festival scenario. Next slide, please. And finally, option 3, which is my personal favorite, it provides, again, 15-foot sidewalks on both sides of the roadway, similar to the existing condition, but it really improves and enhances bicycle safety. So you'll notice the bicycle lane has now moved in between the sidewalk and the parallel parking. And that really reduces not only the potential for vehicle and bicycle conflicts, but it also partially reduces that instance of dooring that we've discussed a little bit earlier, because now the bicycles are on the passenger side of the vehicle, so less opportunity for conflict. But it also, you'll notice kind of the visually narrower corridor. I forgot to mention this on option 2, which is also an aspect of that option, but by pushing those the parallel parking in closer to the travel lanes and having a visually narrow corridor, that tends to provide what we call traffic calming, which is reduced vehicle speeds. Drivers tend to drive a little bit slower when the corridor visually seems a little bit smaller to them. Next slide, please. And again, visual for what option 3 might look like under a festival scenario. Next slide, please. All right, and just to kind of summarize comparison of the various alternatives. So option 1, again, more of a traditional multimodal option, similar to the Lewis Street overpass, is the least cost option, currently estimated conceptually at $3.3 million in construction costs. Option 2, again, really prioritizes that sidewalk space, that furniture zone, but it does have reduced bicycle safety. And then option 3 really provides the highest level of safety and opportunity for all users, bikes, peds, and traveling vehicles, but it does come at the highest cost at an estimated $3.9 million in construction. Next slide, please. All right, now I'm going to pass it on to Alma Villegas, who's our engagement lead. She's going to talk a little bit about the public engagement activities we've completed to date, what we have for planned for the future, and some of the results that we received. So, Alma, take it away.
Buenas noches, everyone. I'm Alma Villegas. I have been partnering on the public engagement and just going to do a few slides here. So here's a list of everything that's been done. We started with just tabling at the Lewis overpass groundbreaking and getting some initial information from people, just some contact information. But we began our outreach. Brian and I went down to Lewis Street. We walked between 2nd and 5th Streets and talked to several of the businesses there to just get some input, and I will share a little bit about that. There's also been an online public survey through the city's website that John has been great at pushing out there. We held an open house a couple of weeks ago as well. And then there's just different other future events that we're doing through community events, having conversations with some of your community leaders, and there's also an upcoming stakeholder engagement meeting that we're going to have. Next slide. So this is just a sample of the website. There's a webpage where the city that had information about the project, and this is where we posted the online survey. There's also been some social media posts and advertising in radio and newspaper. Next slide. So this is where the meat of the outreach is. It doesn't look like we can see everything, or at least I can't see everything, but hopefully you can see it. So there's been three major public engagement activities that we've had. The first one is the door-to-door outreach, which was primarily with businesses around Lewis Street. And they preferred the option 3 that Jason just presented. The online survey also preferred option 3. And then we have the open house, which preferred option 2, and you can see how the different results play out. Option 3 and 2, pretty close together. I think that there's a combination of people that like both of those options. For the Lewis Street business outreach, talking to the businesses, they definitely favor the extended sidewalk to be able to use that to promote their products and their businesses. So that was the priority there. Although option 2 did come a close second on, option 2 was the extended sidewalk. Option 2 and option 3 were pretty close together, but the extended sidewalk is definitely a preference there. For the online survey, option 3, 54% of the folks that responded selected that option, with 18% selecting it as an option 2. And then you see pretty close together option 2 with 32% of the people that responded to the survey. On the open house, the option 2 was a priority. We gave people an opportunity to vote on several of the options, so there is some duplication here. I think it's also important to share that not all of these results are unique, meaning that we did have people that participated in the business outreach, that also participated in the online survey, and that came to the open house. So there is some overlap there. And the last 2 columns, you can just see some of the priorities that people had, whether relating to improvements that they wanted to see or some key concerns. I'm just going to highlight, again, extended sidewalk is the most attractive one that people liked. Also ensuring that there is additional space for seating, and the aesthetics is really important for people. Things like having more trash cans or having more lighting for safety. Public safety is also very important to them in terms of pedestrians and bike lanes. That was something that stood out for the online survey, because the online survey definitely had a representation of more of a wider, because you had more people that were outside of Pasco that were weighing in. So we had several people that are supportive of bikes that were supportive of that option. And then around the key concerns, I'm going to talk a little bit later on about things that were mentioned in all public engagement efforts, which are things that are not necessarily related to this project, but for now, in terms of those things they are related. One of the things that the businesses talked about when we went to the door-to-door outreach was things like, an increase in dust that they've experienced as a result of the construction at Peanuts Park, and how is that going to be mitigated during this process, because that's adding time to them when they're setting up their business in the morning. And then things like safety, obviously, is a concern for everyone, particularly around some of the homeless population that are in the area. And then for the open house, one of the things that was we heard from people was things like, well, why are we having such an emphasis on bikes when there isn't a lot of current bicyclists that are using that area? And so those are some of the things that we heard. Next slide, please. This is just a sample of a graph that came out of the online survey feedback that just demonstrates that the key priority for everyone is really pedestrian and bike safety, as well as access, pedestrian access through wider sidewalks, but also access to the businesses in terms of the concerns around the construction impacts during this phase. And just to end here before we go to the next slide, we do want to mention a little bit about the stakeholder engagement. And so we're planning on doing a stakeholder engagement meeting at probably in early December. That is going to be primarily composed of business owners and tenants of Lewis Corridor, because of the reason that they're going to be the most impacted during the construction. And so we want to talk to them about what are some of their key concerns and how are the ways that we can ensure that we are addressing those concerns during the construction process. There will be others that will be brought into the stakeholder group, but we have decided to prioritize those businesses on Lewis Street. Next slide. These are a few, we're calling them non-project related concerns mainly because we don't really have any control. These are just concerns that are associated with other issues with Pasco. Things like zoning limitations or feedback that we received around, well, it's wonderful that you're gonna revitalize downtown and have these beautiful sidewalks and these extended streets and aesthetics, et cetera. But then how does that compare with the storefronts, right? Is there an opportunity for the storefronts to be improved so that there is a balance there? Things also associated with safety and the homeless. And then, of course, there were several people that mentioned the concerns around the speed limit around Lewis Street, particularly if you add a bike lane, and then how is that going to ensure that you're protecting those bicyclists? And I'd like to hand it over to John to see if he wants to talk a little bit about some of the other things that the city is doing to address some of these concerns.
Yeah, so we have different ongoing plans that are more geared towards addressing these concerns, and we've been coordinating with planning to make sure that as we get feedback from stakeholders, that gets passed along for consideration by people working on planning documents for us. So it's a little bit tricky when people don't see something until it's a physical project, but sometimes the physical project is the result of multiple plans and a whole lot of work that goes before projects. So we've been working with planning to make sure that these considerations are passed on to them so that those can get rolled into planning documents so we can in parallel work on our infrastructure and also plan accordingly so that the city is physically built and then built with our plans towards the same goals.
Okay. All right, next slide, please.
And this is just a slide that we wanted to show. This is a word cloud that came out of the online survey in terms of what matters for people in terms of this revitalization of Lewis Street. So I'll hand it back to Jason.
All right, next slide, please. Great, thank you. Thank you, Alma and John. So based on the alternatives analysis and what we heard from the community through our outreach efforts, a fourth alternative was developed. And we're excited about this alternative. It's a bit of a hybrid between options 2 and 3, and it's our recommended alternative. And I really want to just give a quick shout out to Associate Engineer Fido Rico with the City of Pasco, who worked closely with our team to develop this alternative. And what I really like about this alternative is it balances the priorities that we heard from the different stakeholders. So you'll see in this option that the bicycle lanes are in a very similar location as they were in option 3. But rather than being at the same level of the parallel parking and the travel lanes, it's now that bike lane is now elevated up to be at the same elevation as the sidewalks. And what that does is provide for a 20-foot wide sidewalk, combination sidewalk elevated bike lane on each side of the roadway, which again, similar to option 3, provides that enhanced bicycle safety that we spoke about. It reduces parked vehicle and bike conflicts, again, by having those bicycles on the passenger side of those parked vehicles, as well as being slightly elevated. And it provides that traffic calming aspect of a visually narrower corridor. The nice thing about this option is a typical day, you're going to have a dedicated bike lane. It'll be signed that way. There'll be some visual indicators so that it's very clear to the traveling public that this is the bike lane. But during a festival event where the street's closed, that bike lane could also be closed and then be converted to provide for a wider sidewalk area for vendors to set up, additional pedestrian access. So really it has the potential to function for multiple uses versus just purely being dedicated to a bicycle lane. And we really feel like this kind of meets in the middle, right? It helps meet the desired for the extended sidewalk that we heard from the local businesses. It also meets the city's planning goals and policies that John mentioned earlier through the various planning efforts that have gone on for many years. And it really prioritizes, again, all modes of transportation And just to reiterate, the highest priority we heard from the online survey was ped and bike safety. So this alternative really hits on that. But it is worth noting that similar to option 3, it is the highest cost alternative. We estimate this to be right around the $4 million of construction costs, similar to option 3. Next slide, please.
Well, could I have a quick question?
Yeah.
So
please.
just basically the difference in that option is that the bike path is elevated with the sidewalk.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So that concludes the presentation. And to kind of circle back to say where we're at, the objective of our presentation was to present these alternatives to council and the results of our public feedback so that we could keep the design advancing. Like I mentioned, our goal is to have construction next summer so that we can have minimize construction disruptions to businesses. So it would be great if we could get people to come together and think about these options and give us feedback so that we know which direction council would want us to take. Yeah, so with that being said, are there any questions from council?
So when would we be deciding? Would you guys want some feedback now, or we have a little bit more time?
The designers are ready to proceed with the design if we give them feedback now.
Okay.
If you guys need additional information, we could always track some down too.
Yeah, okay. Council, any comments for the presenters? Go ahead, Councilman Alvarado.
Yeah, quick question about elevating the bicycle lane. Does that, I guess in our zoning or in how we do setbacks, does that count as sidewalk and then allow more flexibility for business owners to have those setbacks be addressed that currently are prohibitive of being able to have outdoor seating? And so does that, by the design of it being elevated, does that count as part of the sidewalk? I don't know, maybe perhaps that may be a question for Mr. White.
I would have to probably talk with Eric at length about definitions of sidewalks, but I think during typical operations, it would be striped and need to be maintained, dedicated for cyclists for safety reasons, that you can't have someone drinking a beer and someone riding a bike in the same lane. But during a festival event or something like that, there would be the flexibility for businesses, for the city to decide how that space was used. Either to possibly you could have vendors along the sides and not close Lewis for traffic and have the festival essentially on the sidewalk. Or we could, if it was a more business-focused event, businesses could spill out more onto the sidewalk and use that additional 5 feet of bike lane that was not open during the event. So it's a little bit of a hybrid. It wouldn't be something they could use full-time, but it would give the city flexibility to use that space for events.
Go ahead, Ms. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no setbacks in the downtown area, so it's a moot point. And although it is commonly understood that sidewalk seating is prohibited downtown, it's not. It isn't used often, but it's not prohibited.
So my understanding, because I checked on this a little bit, is there is a distance that has to be maintained for pedestrian access. So if a business uses the sidewalk, they can't use the whole sidewalk up to the curb. They have to leave an area for people to walk by. Mm-hmm. And I forget, it's either 6 or 8 feet. So this bicycle lane wouldn't add additional width so the business could grow up to the edge of the bicycle lane and not leave room for pedestrians. They would essentially have the ability to use the same outdoor space now for typical business.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarado. Good. Anybody else?
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Martinez, and thank you, staff and Mckay Sposito for work on this. I do have I've exchanged a number of emails, and I think if I'm understanding what the concern is on the extended sidewalks and what the business owners are looking for, I feel like this option, the preferred option, doesn't actually solve it. The heart of the matter is exactly what we just talked about. They want to have adequate seating for outdoor seating in front. And that helps liven up a downtown. It adds a lot of, a lot of accessibility to just people coming downtown and wanting to be there. When we're talking about, like right now, we've had some temporary seating out in front of, one of the places downtown. I had an opportunity to sit out there, and it was very difficult for pedestrians to be able to really get around that space. And I'm concerned that if we're not, if functionally we're not, we may not be prohibiting outdoor seating, but if functionally we're limiting them to, two little two-seater tables, that's not really going to help revitalize our downtown at all. And so I think we're missing the point of what the business owners are wanting, which is they want room to have outdoor seating. They want to be able to display some wares outdoors, that sort of thing. And I just don't see how this option gets there. And so I think we're functionally ignoring a set of downtown business owners who have been very vocal about what they're looking for, about how we can help them. And so I think we're in that same spot where we're saying we're listening to them, but this option I don't think really addresses the heart of the matter. So I guess I'm not sure how we can move forward with this and without that extra seating outdoors. So could you help me understand better how we can manage that? I mean, I thought of a couple alternatives I've proposed that to staff, and obviously the response so far has been very negative towards that approach at this time. So what can we do to make sure the business owners have what they need?
So to provide some background for the folks listening, there was some discussion via emails regarding if we could use adjacent streets possibly for bicycle use. The issue with Lewis Corridor is we're cramming all the uses in the same place. So there's businesses, there's a lot of traffic, there's bicycles, there's pedestrians, and there's parking, and we have a set number of feet we can work in. And by the time we divvy it up amongst all the interested parties, there's not enough for everybody to have as much as they would like. So there was a question of if possibly Clark or Columbia would be adequate, which are the streets to the north and south of Lewis that run parallel to it. If possibly we could separate some of this, make our puzzle less tricky, and move possibly the bicycle access either to the north or south of Block, so we loosen one of our constraints and give us more flexibility to focus on a smaller number of constraints and optimize for those on Lewis. So we took a quick look at that, and the streets to the north and south of Lewis both have 80-foot wide right-of-ways like Lewis does, but they're configured a little bit differently right now, and sometimes it's hard to reconfigure something and change a lot for a business as opposed to keep it fairly similar to what it is now. Both of those streets have, unlike Lewis that has parallel parking both sides, both those streets have angled parking on one side and parallel on the other. And angled parking takes up roughly twice as much width of the roadway right-of-way as our parallel parking does. And also, it was built with 12-foot, I believe, travel lanes, and Lewis was built with 17-foot travel lanes. So Lewis actually had a bike lane built into the physical piece of asphalt, it just wasn't striped. So when we're trying to add a bike lane, we're not having to take real estate from one of the other uses. We're just literally taking that space that was already there and using it differently. So if we were to move bicycles to Clark or Columbia, what would need to happen is we would probably have to convert angled parking to parallel parking, which would lose about a third of the parking capacity along each of those along whatever corridor we targeted. And we would still have to take away some sidewalk from businesses because that parking transition wouldn't get us enough room for the bike lanes. So it's a hard balance because ideally we would have found a corridor where there was enough room and we could maybe separate and have one thing happen in one corridor and one happen in another, but we weren't lucky and that wasn't the case. And I spoke with our planning group about what the purpose is of having bicycles here and if this is intended to be a way to get through Pasco to somewhere else, or if the goal is to bring people here as a destination. And given the business types we have downtown of shops and bakeries and restaurants, the objective isn't that someone drives through and doesn't look, but that they actually come through and stop and visit these businesses. So moving the bike lane off of Lewis would be counterproductive to the long-term economic revitalization goal of bringing more people into downtown who, since they're there, they then spend money downtown. So it's a tough situation, and unfortunately we can't magically wave a magic wand and have more right-of-way. So we're stuck in a situation where I think the same group of stakeholders may be more upset if we were to eliminate 30% of the parking along one of the streets adjacent to their business. So outdoor seating, especially with COVID, has been a lifeline of businesses, and they probably wish they had more. But if we eliminated a whole bunch of parking to get them some outdoor space, I think with a parking study, Jacob was telling me we're roughly about 80% capacity or something. So if we start carving out large percentages of our capacity along streets, we could set ourselves back as opposed to moving forward like people hope we would. So it's definitely a challenging thing, and it's not something where we have a simple solution that works for everyone. But this is the development that we thought would be the most balanced benefit, and it wouldn't take away something someone has now. So we wouldn't be taking away a lot of parking or taking away someone's sidewalk, which if we switched the development to an adjacent corridor we would have to do.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you, Council Member?
So I understand some of those conversations, and I guess maybe I'm using the wrong terminology here, so let me just ask to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
Are the sidewalks bigger on, say, Columbia than they are on Lewis?
They're between the two sides of the street, there's 45 feet of width devoted to sidewalks, whereas Lewis only has 30 feet that's split between the two sides. So there's a whole 15 extra feet of sidewalk width on Clark and Columbia. If I did my quick math before the council meeting, correct.
So I guess let me be clear, and what I was trying to do is propose is highlight what I'm hearing from the community, and I think what we saw from a lot of the personal conversations with folks, the businesses, when we're talking about expanded sidewalks, which was one of the top listed items of priority, I believe that this solution does not solve that issue. It doesn't provide what was actually being asked, which was for additional sidewalk space. So I'm just restating, I guess, my concern that there's lots of different ways we could look at solving this, but I believe that the current proposed option, I believe only option 2, actually solves what the businesses were asking for, which was outdoor seating, enough sidewalks they can have outdoor seating and outdoor displays without interrupting pedestrian travel. So we could talk about a lot of different solutions and brainstorm that, but that wasn't my intent tonight. My intent was to highlight the fact that I think that the hybrid option of 4 that was presented tonight doesn't solve that answer or doesn't solve that question any better than the options 1 or 3 did. So that's the point I want to make, and happy to have continued conversations offline with this, but I have a strong concern about this and how this will frankly be viewed by some of our downtown business owners who are, again, very, very vocal in our council chambers about what they need, and that this is going to look again like we are giving them an opportunity to speak, but not actually listening and changing how we're approaching things. So that's my concern, and I will again happy to have further conversation offline.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. Councilmember Alvarado.
Yeah, just curious if there was any conversation around something like what option 1 would bring, but with kind of as we have these outcomes of landscaping come out in many cities are beginning to do this more, where you take away a little bit of parking to be able to have seating instead of a few parking spots perhaps strategically placed near restaurants. Was that a conversation or a consideration in this process?
I don't think we looked at that. One of the early pieces of input we received was that parking was a very coveted resource. So we tried to look at options that prioritized not compromising parking. So that is a hybrid option where at select locations we could have essentially limited parallel parking, and that would get us 8 more feet of sidewalk to go from 15 feet up to 23 feet. We would probably get into the business where we would have to decide which buildings got that and which ones didn't. And then I'm guessing by the time everybody weighed in, we would have 23-foot sidewalks along the whole corridor, because how would we give it to one person but not their neighbor? It's an interesting idea. I can see the value of it at key spots, but it might be tricky for business use to figure out which building owners and which tenants got those and which didn't.
I think in Kennewick that was initiated by a partnership with the Downtown Foundation, or whoever the agency there was, at the coffee shop, and seemed a pretty, not super expensive. I mean, there definitely was an investment. I know they do that a lot in Walla Walla, and where some of that parking was converted.
Yeah.
But it was initiated by the I guess, by the owner or by the persons there. And so I'm just curious if that would be something to consider. I might be a little late in the game, but.
Yeah, I think
Sure.
that's definitely a detail that we could look at as we move forward into the design. Part of the process is it'll be an iterative design where we develop the corridor from this alternative to something that's on a piece of paper that shows the whole corridor, and then we'll interface with local business owners and property owners and get their input on what that looks like for them and their personal establishments along that corridor. So something like that could come up during those discussions of how we deal with specific areas and specific businesses, but that hadn't been something we'd gotten to yet at this point in the project.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Well, I would just say that based on the workshop that I attended when you guys were here, and based on other very active cities where they have a downtown area atmosphere, I would have to, and with the restrictions that we have to deal with, I would just have to go with option 2 myself. You could still get bikes through there. I know that there is a compromise with the bike safety, but I think it's vital for the businesses to have the 20-foot sidewalks in place. So my vote would be to stay with option 2 personally. So that's where I would go. Any other quick comments by council members?
Mayor, it's Councilman Serrano. I don't know that I'm preferential to 2, but I mean, I from what Councilman Maloney has talked about, there's an obvious need for seating and the ability to allow people to linger longer, if you will, buy a sandwich, sit outside, whatever the case is. So I don't know that, I don't like the idea of having bikes in the traffic lanes. I don't know if there's some other alternative hybrid that, Councilman Maloney, you've mentioned thoughts of some things that you're working on. If you have any other hybrid 4 or 2.5 or 3.5 or whatever, I'd certainly welcome any further discussion. It doesn't have to be tonight, but we need to find a way to both be safe and provide access for businesses to allow people to congregate and turn this corridor. I mean, we are spending a lot of money down there between Peanuts Park and the improvements down here that we're talking about, the Lewis Street overpass obviously being the big ticket item. If there is no place for people to spend time, it'll still continue to be a pass-through. And we need this to be a key corridor where people want to be. And by providing beautified sidewalks where they can congregate safely, that's going to be critical. Parking we'll have to deal with. We'll figure that out. But I making it an attractive place with the ability to stay, to rest, to eat is critical.
Thank you, Councilmember.
That's all I got.
So hopefully that's enough information for you to go with tonight. I think you've heard at least four comments on the direction. Did anybody else have any last comments? Go ahead.
I'm wondering if I could weigh in. I apologize for interrupting, but I just wanted to just let everyone know that because I have been very, very focused on the businesses and making sure that the businesses are being heard. This is the reason why I, as a public engagement consultant, I've recommended that when we look at the stakeholder group, we look at the stakeholder group as those that are going to be the most impacted by the construction. So I'm a big advocate for the businesses. That said, I also am going by what I heard when we talked to folks, both in the open house and in the door-to-door outreach. And option 3 and option 2 were very, very close. And so I just want to caution you all to make any decisions based on the voices of a few and try to see if you can find a balance. I think people want extended sidewalks. I also think it's important to also look at the future vision. I think when people are reacting to the concerns around the bike issue, a lot of it has to do with their current reality and what they're currently seeing. And so there was one person that I talked to that really talked about the accessibility of the use of the bike lane beyond bikes, right? People that use other modes of, of that type of transportation, where you're talking about, they described it as a little old lady with a little cart, or, a women with strollers, things like that. And so if there's a way to find a little bit more flexibility so that you can make everybody happy, but I want to encourage you to also be forward thinking in your visioning about what it means for the future of Pasco and bringing in more businesses. And that also includes the bike traffic from those that are outside of the area. So it's a tricky balance, but I encourage you all to think about it from all those perspectives. In that at the end of the day, when we pose that question of these options, when you gave the choice between the 2 and the 3, people understood the importance of making sure that you had safety for the bicyclists, which option 2 does not provide. So thank you for allowing me to share that, and good luck with your decision.
And if I could add a couple of quick things as well. One of the hard things for us to balance is that we have very different groups of stakeholders. And we saw fairly different results from different means of reaching out to stakeholders. Businesses looked outside their business to see what would help their business thrive outside of their physical building. People that were either from the greater Pasco area that were not business owners, or people not from Pasco, from Kennewick or Richland, had a very different perspective of what would bring them downtown. So one of the fundamental things we have to figure out is, do we build, how do you balance the consumer saying that for me to be a consumer and go here, I want bicycle lanes and pedestrian facilities, against a business owner whose preference is to have wider sidewalks to accommodate people when they come there. So it's a catch-22. It's definitely a hard call to make, but we did see that division between types of stakeholders and what they were asking for. So if we were to take a statistical poll of all Pasco residents, based off of what we saw, we would have a strong favor for bike lanes and pedestrian safety. If we focused on just the business owners in the Pasco core, they would say there aren't currently bicycles there that are their customers. They would prefer to have wider sidewalks to have outdoor seating. So it's a question of how do we fit that in with the bike ped plan and the transportation system master plan, and how do we build a city for all the residents while at the same time taking care of the businesses of the downtown corridor.
Okay.
So this is Councilman Maloney. I just want to briefly respond to both those comments. I really appreciate the extra context from people whose this is their profession, right? And I guess what I think you're hearing from us is, in essence, what we as a council are doing is providing a little bit of a weighting factor that may be different than that was being provided before. And as Alma was saying, we're talking about something that for the business owners was very close. And so I think we're seeing that perhaps our preference is a little bit different. Now, to be very clear, I strongly support multimodal transportation. I just think that when we're looking at this and having to balance this sort of issue in our downtown corridor right now, I don't see it weighing in. I see it being close, but I see it going the other direction for me personally. I do believe we have other alternatives that will provide multimodal transportation. And I do also believe very strongly that we are very myopically focused on just Lewis Street, as though that is our only downtown. And that's all of it. That's simply just not true. When we're looking at what 4th Street can provide, and we look at the greater area of, just even the parallel streets, if we're focused only as Lewis Street as being our downtown corridor and therefore must be the only place that people travel, we're selling ourselves short on what a long-term vision of what an overall downtown can and should be. Pasco's downtown must grow over the next coming generations, or it will just simply die out again. Maybe it'll be a quaint little spot where, you can go get some flowers or maybe a pastry. But ultimately, for it to be a vibrant downtown, it will have to be bigger than it is right now. And that means we're going to long-term need to be considering things outside of just Lewis Street. And that's where I believe that we can satisfy all needs once we take a zoom out a little bit. But I'm presuming a lot. There's a lot of work going on. And so I wasn't trying to delve deeply into the conversation tonight, given our limitations of time. But with a further conversation, I think that I would hate for it to be considered that somehow me or my fellow council members don't want to see bike traffic and safe bike travel in Pasco. I don't think that's what we're saying at all. So anyways, that's just my final 2 cents for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. And I honestly, again, I'm all for bike safety and bike path, but I just can't see that, you know, if we were to put a bike path on to Clark or Columbia, you know, I mean, I don't think walking half a block to get to where you want to get is going to, you know, deter them from wanting to go to where they're wanting to go downtown. So, but I just think it's just too vital. We need that space utilized for pedestrians and for the business owners, and you can still get a bike through there. It wouldn't stop me. Well, I'm speaking for myself. I wouldn't stop me from riding my bike through there. But again, I just think it's imperative that we have this space available for the pedestrians. And I'm actually very cautious about having the bike trail elevated and going on the right side, because you still have the same safety concern of somebody from the passenger, specifically a little kid coming out of the passenger side onto the sidewalk and opening the door and having the same thing happen. So again, I'm gonna stick to option 2, and that's just the direction I think I would stay at. Councilmember Alvarado?
Yeah, I think if we were to go option 2, there, I would feel comfortable with that only if there was sufficient traffic calming as far as bumps along the road that would keep that speed at a very small. I think that could also be a win for business owners, because as people drive a little bit slower or go through their bicycles, they have more eyes on what's going on in the downtown area, and would perhaps be able to draw them in for, you know, oh, well, maybe I should go to that restaurant, or maybe I should. I am concerned about, you know, how fast we would go through that corridor if we have that shared lane, and so that I would feel comfortable if it was sufficient traffic calming that everyone know, like, if you want to get past through here, it's gonna take you a while to get through past to this. So that's the trade-off. But you know,
one of the challenges we have is that the overpass was built to provide a transportation connection between different zones in Pasco, and so if we go a block down, we have to take that into account. So if we build an overpass that encourages freight and trucks that couldn't make it through the underpass and keep their mirrors, then if we put them on a street with a whole bunch of traffic calming features that aren't pleasant for trucks, then it's almost not a continuously thought out project. So we have to be very careful how we calm traffic, because that's could be fighting against another project we have under active construction.
All right, well, that's where we're sitting right now. Again, we maybe, yes.
I was just going to say, Mayor, I think there's been a lot of good feedback that we've received tonight, and it'd probably be best if staff goes back and perhaps works on some of the hybrid alternatives that were presented tonight, rather than committing to one of the options presented this evening. I think we can bring it back shortly and
Sure.
try and consolidate. We really want to be respectful of yours and the council's time tonight
Sure.
as well, and I think that's probably the best step for us to move forward, if that's all right with you and council.
Yep, that'd be great.
Thank you.
So yeah, I would just say right now that would be the direction that most of the council would go. But yeah, if we can come up with options that would help give a better idea, that we can take that as well. All right, thank you very much.
thank you for the feedback.
Next, we'll move on to the Transportation System Master Plan. Director Rick White, you want to kick us off?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is the city's very first transportation system master plan. It's the comprehensive plan of transportation, so to speak, and it's been going on for some time now. We have with us tonight Carl Springer from DKS Associates, and he will be leading council through the presentation this evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Is my audio okay?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Glad to see you. Glad to be here. It's been a good process. I'm happy to work with city staff that I have. Mr. Dan Ford, the city engineer, and Jacob Gonzalez have been great assets in helping us understand how to carry this plan forward. So let me, given that it just rounded 9 o'clock, let me keep my presentation relatively brief, if you don't mind. And we can definitely answer questions during or after, however you see fit. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to cover these 3 basic components of the plan. There's lots to it. The draft version of the plan will be made available to you in the coming days. The staff has that document now, so you can expect to have access to that. So I'm just going to give you some highlights of the issues, the challenges, and some of the outcomes. Next slide, please. So the first section is dedicated to kind of how we framed up the plan. What were the key issues that we considered as we developed it that were specific and unique to the city of Pasco? You know, I've done these kinds of studies and these planning efforts in cities all over the West Coast. So one of the first things we always have to do as a planner is to think through what audience are we serving. So we're always looking for those unique elements that are going to make a difference to a community. So next slide, please. In terms of the planning process, these are the three big pieces. And there's a lot of things going on in long-range plans. It's a bit of a complex document, but the basic components of it revolve around these three pieces. So it's the style and shape of the system framework that you lay before it. You just had a good, lively discussion of what a complete street looks like in your downtown. The other pieces have metrics in terms of how well it performs. The current era of doing long-range planning has an analysis component to it, but also a metric of how well it should actually operate, not only for driving, for freight, but also for walking and bicycling. So it's been a good process in that regard too, because we've incorporated those components to this plan. The last piece, of course, is funding. We're going to touch on that lightly because tonight is not a deep dive on funding, but just to kind of raise an awareness in a couple issues. Overall, funding really is comprised of sources that you're familiar with. Your local agency partners, that your washed out friends can sponsor some things, but the majority of the work that's done by the city is either through your transportation improvement program or through your traffic impact fee program, or some combination of the two. So those are the three that we generally rely on in terms of how these plans get implemented. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the demographics of the city as it sits today. You all know this, but just for the audience, right around 75,000 people today. The horizon year that we looked at was 120,000 people, so just over actually. So in that case, 20 plus years from now, the city would be as big or larger than Kennewick. So you'd be the largest city in the Tri-Cities, which is saying something given where you were not that long ago. The other thing that caught my eye when I was looking at this was how the city is very young. You have a third of your residents are children, and a fair number of your seniors have some sort of disability to be considered. So when you're designing a how people move system, which is what a transportation system is, you have to think about who you're actually serving. So you have a large share of children and a significant amount of seniors that have what I would call, you have to take those kind of thinking, those kind of needs into consideration. The other thing, of course, that's happened since we began this is the fun and of having COVID pandemics and a lot of remote working. And that's really changed the character of commute patterns for sure. We're not quite sure how long that'll linger, but that certainly has an effect. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of some of the community outreach events we did online. Of course, in the world of COVID, it was all virtual. So this is one particular question we asked during that survey was how convenient and easy is it to get around? As you can see in the chart, it's kind of a spectrum. So some did well, some were in the middle, and some really had a tough time. And when we mapped this out, we saw that highlighted to the greatest extent in the West Pasco area and in the Broadmoor area. In the next slide, you can see a map of that. So the dots highlight locations where folks had difficulties getting across the facilities. And we're not talking in cars, but if you're walking and biking or trying to get around, these red dots represent the community vision of places that cause them some kind of stress or concern. You can see the clusters along Sandifer Parkway, Roads 100, Road 68, Argent Road, those kind of places, which in terms of when you're out of your car can be a difficult environment to navigate. Not to mention the interchanges on 182 at Road 68 and 100 are a bit dated, so they don't provide the walking and biking facilities that if WashDOT were to build them today would be incorporated. So if you're not in your car going through there, it's a bit of a challenge. As you can see on the right side of the map, the dots are much fewer. So in the central and west and downtown parts of Pasco, the environments for walking and biking are generally better, in part because of the grid patterns down there and the dispersion of traffic flows. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, this is Councilmember Maloney. Right before we go on from that slide, I just have a quick question.
Sure. Back up, please. Thank you.
I'm a little concerned that this cuts off right at Oregon Avenue there and isn't taking into account the easternmost part of our city. Is that because we didn't have responses? Do we not have any traveling challenges here? Can you help me understand why we chose to cut it off there?
That's because, to be honest, Councilor, because I framed the photo wrong and I trimmed off that part of the city. We did actually have responses over there, but I'm sorry, I think I inadvertently trimmed that part off. So we didn't neglect them, to be sure.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I would like to see that if it's not in the plan, then separately via email would be just fantastic. That is a community that often feels.
The appendix to the plan. We had copies of all the materials from the open houses in the appendix.
Great, thank you. I know that that community can often feel ignored and neglected by our city, and this is just the worst optics. I'm sorry. I know it's a mistake. I appreciate that, and I know that you did not ignore them, so I appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing that in the overall plan.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Yeah, again, that was my error. So aside from working with the community, a lot of our work is the technical analysis. So in terms of how traffic flows and the safety analysis, Brian Chandler, I think you heard his name on the prior item. He's our expert in the company on the safety side of it. So he helped us identify locations that needed attention. They're highlighted in this diagram. We had a lot of crash concerns along the Court Street and Sylvester Street corridors, and those are mainly rear end crashes because there's not room on those corridors, at least the parts where we have the crashes, for a center turn lane or left turns to step away from the through traffic. So we've got a lot of recurring problems along those that are highlighted. The other pieces that are noted on this diagram are where the congestions are, and I think you all probably know those. But certainly Road 68, the 182 interchanges, and then along 395 in the central part of the city are where congestion pops up most consistently. Next slide. So one of the challenges, and just kind of highlighting some of the differences between this plan and some of the thinking done previously. Next slide. So a quick snapshot of what a system plan is. So going from left to right, we began the process with the vision and goals and performance measures. Frankly, the visions and goals were really derived from the work the city had already done with the comp plan, the transportation element of the comp plan. So it's not like we reinvented the wheel there, but we wanted to make sure that we lined up with that and actually took the step of providing performance measures to help us make decisions on what components of the system make sense for investments. So that's the nature of that. And as you go from left to right, you work across how things look today, how they'll look in the future, and what kind of solutions best fit your interest for meeting the goals that were defined in the first step. And that's what lands on the last step: the plans, the design standards, etc. Those are the primary outcomes of the plan, and those would all talk about in a later section of this presentation. Next slide, please. Maybe. All right, compared to prior planning efforts, we provided more focus on what I would call complete street solutions. So we introduced bike facilities in cases where they were not provided previously. A lot of that is happening in the growth areas. So these are new streets or streets that are currently 2 lanes with unimproved shoulders. And eventually, as growth occurs, they'll be improved to provide those kinds of facilities. So that's predominantly the case when we talk about adding bike facilities. That's happening on in those kinds of situations, as opposed to retrofits. That's kind of a different case for the most part. The other thing we were cognizant of was access to transit and trying to figure out how to configure the neighborhoods and crossings to arterials to make it convenient to get to the transit stops in a safe and convenient way. And your last item, you talked a little bit about traffic calming, and this, the focus of the number 2 there is really on kind of highlighting routes through neighborhoods that need some kind of traffic, what we call traffic management strategies to address neighborhood speeding concerns. So that's a separate category of street designation in this plan that I'll touch on. And the last is, I think, a topic that you've heard a little bit before, is the street spacing and ped-bike access spacing guidelines. That is will be manifested primarily in new neighborhoods. You don't see that applying to old neighborhoods very often, but it gives folks a way to get out of a neighborhood safely, conveniently, if they choose or are not able to take a car to get there. Next slide, please. So one of the major outcomes of the plan in terms of the functional needs of it and the performance was to identify bike routes, not just all bike routes, but bike routes that are important to connect north, south, and east and west. And we'll show that to you on a map in a minute. The other one I'll touch on is in terms of mobility targets, that's something that's dealt with at the time of land development when there's traffic impact studies done. There's a calculation that traffic engineers do to see how well a particular location is working. And so we developed some ways to account for that regardless of the type of control on the intersection, whether it's stop controlled or a signal or what. So we provided that level of detail. Next slide. The last one I'll touch on briefly is the 3 that I mentioned before, the WSDOT funding. And all our conversations with WSDOT during the process, they have very limited access to any kind of expansion of the interchanges or modernization of the interchanges. But as you know, as your local partner, you just continue that dialogue and see where you can progress on that. The other topic to be addressed, and this is in the works to be addressed at a later date, is the traffic impact fee and how that might be readjusted to account for some of these growth and the new investments that you'll be undertaking. Next slide. All right, so the next few slides are just maps, and I'll highlight some pieces of the maps. Again, these are all contained in the draft plan that you'll see in the next coming days. So next slide, please. All right, number 1 is the street functional class map. So this is the hierarchy of streets in Pasco, and the color tells you where it falls in that hierarchy. So the top level city streets, of course, all the freeways are something other, so those are all the interstates, but the highest level street in terms of volume, speeds, carrying capacity are the principal arterials. So that'd be Road 100, Road 68, Court Street, you can see them in red there, and Burns Road on the top. We all have a vision of extending someday Burns Road all the way over to 395. If that is capable, that would be a desirable link to provide you another way to get to that side of the city without going down across the freeway. There's a number of other layers in this classification shown here. The one I wanted to draw your attention to is the last one, the neighborhood collector in blue. So those are the neighborhood that had some clear needs for managing speeding problems. So might be tough to see on your screen tonight, but when you get the plan, you can take a look at those and see where those are located and kind of think through how you think that fits in terms of reasonableness for speed management strategies. Next slide. This is your freight system, and it's set up based on tonnage. So all the big weight is out on the interstate system, but it's stratified across the city for mainly access to that state system. So for the most part, it excludes the city system aside, except for the east side of the city where most of the industrial traffic is happening. So you can see the designations there. Next slide. This is the motor vehicle project map, and there's what goes along with this map. This is kind of an index map, and what goes along with this map is 3 or 4 pages of tables that show the projects that are listed. So those green circles are intersection upgrades. They're kind of scattered across the city, but predominantly in the Broadmoor and the north of 182 area. Also a number of new streets, as you can see in the very top. All those solid lines are new streets or expanded streets. And the last two are the bridges. One is the one that was just talked about in the item prior, the Lewis Street replacement, and then the bridge that's on, shoot, what is that, Dan? Is that Road 72? The overcrossing there that was designated the last plan. So that's the mix of projects that are in the project vehicle map. The next project map on the next slide is the bike and walkway map. And some of these are redundant to the prior map. But what I'll highlight are the ones that are green and yellow. Those are special ped bike projects where we're trying to bolster the walking and biking capabilities for those corridors. These on existing streets. Some of the other ones up on the north side, those are either new streets or basically 2-lane roads now that'll be upgraded to urban standards. And so you'll incorporate the walking and biking component at that time those upgrades are made. But I wanted to put the two together so you can get a sense of kind of the holistic sense of how the system will fit together. So you can navigate on a bike from one side of the city to the next on a bikeway that's designed to make it more convenient and safe than what's out there today. Next slide. And this is kind of the conclusion on the funding part. There is a section in there that identifies the cost estimates. So if you add up all the costs for the list of projects that are identified in the plan, it comes in at about $600 million in today's dollars or last year's dollars. And by our estimate to fund that, that would, if you just take 20 years and divide that into it, it's about $33 million a year. And based on what we understand of your current funding levels in terms of the investments in the transportation improvement program and the TIF fees, that'll cover roughly about half of that level. And so there's decisions ahead to be made in terms of how to consider closing that gap and look at the tools that you have available to you and make some decisions in that regard. I think that's the last slide, but I could have more. Is there another slide? Yes, there is. So the steps to get this thing implemented. So the plan itself provides what I've just shown you overall, but there are some additional steps that will need to be done at a later date to address the connectivity guidelines that we identified, to amend and expand the TIA requirements, and then to consider a different TIF rate than what you've got in place today. So those are what actually make the plan come to life, for those things. At the time of development review, that's what extends it from being just a plan to something that you'll actually see out on the streets. I think that's the last slide, yes? Except for the happy thank you slide. So let me pause there. I don't know what questions you may have, Mayor or councilors, but I'd be happy to try to answer them for you.
Well, thank you very much. Council, any questions or comments?
Councilmember Maloney, I'll have plenty. I think I'm good at this time, though. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the report. That's good information. See how and I'm not sure how we're going to close that gap, but we'll definitely work on it. Maybe, you know, coming up with ideas during the workshop, you know, things of that nature when we do our goals and planning is definitely a time to pursue this a little bit further, but appreciate the work and effort that's been put into this. So that's good information to know for the future. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, next we'll go into intent for annexation, Lamb 5 LLC, Director Rick White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. And this item, well, actually both of this item and the next item, both involve annexations. It will be coming back to City Council The Lam 5 LLC annexation involves, the actual intent to annex is for about a 9-acre site on the northwest corner of Road 68 and Court. However, in this area, there are a substantial amount of existing annexation agreements. Staff intends to research those and will very likely come back to council with an enlarged area that will take in a much more significant portion of this unincorporated county island. So within a meeting or two, you'll be able to see probably an enlarged, at least annexation recommendation from staff.
Is this something that you'll be bringing into for the next meeting?
I don't believe we'll have it for the next meeting, but very likely the meeting after that.
Okay. All right. Very well. How about the annexation for Thanksgiving partnership, Mr. White?
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor and Council. This item's a little different, a little better than 80 acres in this proposed annexation. It's controlled by a single entity. It was most recently incorporated into the expanded urban boundaries with our new comprehensive plan. So this is much more straightforward, and this will be coming back to council at the next meeting to set the public meeting date for accepting the annexation.
Perfect. Any objections or questions from council? I think this one's pretty straightforward as well. Thank you, Mr. White. And next for Mr. Warley, you have a PWRF embankment repair number 5 for the quantity and adjustments reconciliation and project closeout.
Yes, Mr. Mayor and council members, thank you. This item consists of 2 parts, both having to do with the construction of the embankment repair. It's change order number 5, which is the last change order for the project, and it has to do with the project closeout. We're combining both of them into one item. Staff presented to council several times on this project, mostly related to the design contract related to Pace Engineers and the construction contract for Apollo. And as council may remember, this is related to an emergency repair that was needed in order because of a failure of an embankment between 2 storage ponds at the reuse facility. The reason that we came back to council on several different occasions for both the design and the construction phase is because we decided in order to meet the time frame we had to get this repaired quickly and all the approvals needed by ecology, we decided to take an incremental approach to both the design and the construction, meaning that we entered into contracts with the design engineer to go out and start exploring what information was available and what information we needed to gather in order to get approvals from ecology. And then the same thing with the construction contract. We entered into a contract, had them go do some preliminary work. We took a look at what was out on the site after some of the liners were removed. That information was fed back to ecology. Then we went into design, then went into construction, and then back and forth. So it was a purposeful, incremental process in order to get to the final product in as quick a time as we possibly could. We were working against a timeline to get this repaired so that we could get it fixed before the winter storage was needed in the ponds. We got ecology approval. The project is now complete, and our construction manager, Kent McHugh, is going to review the project and the details from the construction side for you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. My name is Kent McHugh. I'm your construction manager, and I'm here to present this project for project closeout. So as Director Worley stated, on June 27th of 2020, we had a failure of the embankment between the 35 and the 8 million gallon reservoir, as you can see in the picture on the right. And working with ecology, came to a agreement with them on a viable design or a repair that was acceptable to them, and entered into a contract with Apollo on December 3rd of 2020, understanding that we were up against the wall we were anticipating actually needing the 35 million gallon reservoir about the 1st of February with the processed water flows that we were receiving into the 110 million gallon reservoir at that time. So we were up against the wall to try to get this done. So they got to work, they got this thing put together, had a few issues as we exposed the existing, pulled back the existing liner, exposed the existing native ground. There was some concern by ecology about the processed water in the ground and so forth, and with the organics, it was going to have the potential to off-gas, and so we ended up actually installing an off-gassing system. That's one of the change orders that came through that city manager was able to approve and so forth. And so there were some issues that came up as we did the exploratory going through this project to try to satisfy their needs or their necessary requirements in order to be able to viably put this back together to their satisfaction. At the end of it, when we were all said and done, they required us to do a leak test on the 35 and the 8 million gallon reservoir, and it was discovered that the bottom or the floor of the 8 million gallon reservoir was had enough breaches in it, and it was damaged beyond repair that we ended up having to go ahead and remove that bottom and replace it, which was one of the final items to take care of. The reconciliation is just cost or bid quantity overages that weren't anticipated in the original design. As we got into it, we ended up taking additional liner out to be able to make sure we had good seams, make sure the ballast tubes were all correct, additional excavation to try to, a lot of it was saturated in the time of the year. It was tough to get the liner back and get this ground to dry out enough to the point where we could get a decent compaction and so forth. So we ended up actually scarifying some of it, trying to loosen it up, get the water out of it, get it dry out, put it back together. So that's basically the project in a nutshell, and it's complete, and Ecology's bought off on it, and we're good to go.
And if I could, Mr. Mayor,
yes,
I just wanted to add that the funding for this project, currently we are pursuing for insurance coverage on this related to the embankment failure. And the other option for payment for this, if that doesn't work, is to come from the Economic Development Fund.
Okay. Questions? All right. So any questions or comments from council?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Martinez, and thank you for the presentation. Mr. Willie and I had a number of back and forth emails on this one as well, because I was very concerned about what had gone wrong originally to create an unexpected $1.25 million expenditure, and trying to understand what the root cause of that and such. I just took some interest in that. I'd say the brief summary of it is my question was, in essence, the heart of it is, how do we know this isn't going to happen again? And Mr. Worley assured me that they have changed their process to make sure that the conditions that arose that would originally create the situation just simply won't occur in the future. That's a very high summary. Mr. Worley, please feel free to correct or expand on that if I misrepresented our email back and forth at all.
No, you covered that very well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the time and energy you put into that, and just assuring me that we're being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. Thank you.
So this will come to council next week for approval.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for that report, and look forward to seeing it next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we'll go to Assistant Manager Adam Lincoln for the citywide phone system upgrade.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll be brief, although this is a pretty exciting item. Since I started here, I was approached by several staff members who are less than enamored with our current phone system, and given that it's from 1996 and cannot be expanded without serious investment in hardware, our phone vendor refers to it as vintage. It was time to look at new options. So we've looked at a few different options, but the one that's been the fan favorite has been called Ring Central. It provides a lot of flexibility on the tech side. It's cloud-based. It works as an app on your computer, on your cell phone. It would work if the power was out, if it's on the user's cell phone. It rings in all places at once. It's really flexible for video calls, for SMS messaging, text messaging. It gives us a lot of redundancy and resiliency, and it also would allow us to expand the system pretty readily. It minimizes impact on our IS staff as well. We've got several staff members that have used this system in the past and speak very favorably of it. It also allows us to expand it so that if we wanted to give council members each a city-issued phone line, phone line, we could do that as well, which I think would probably be something that is favorable when it comes to constituent relations. The nice thing about it too is that in looking at the fiscal impact, as you'll note, that it's budget neutral over the lifetime of the contract, the first 5 years of the contract. So with that, I will pause and see if there's any questions, and if there's any financial related questions, Director Sigdell can answer as well.
Any questions, council? I guess, are you going to get to the implementation of it, or are you done?
Sure. The implementation would be that we'd be looking at probably starting in January is when we'd be starting to roll out the system. It can take a couple weeks to port numbers over, although typically it's 2 or 3 days to actually port the numbers over. That's something that's out of our hands. It's up to our current phone provider to basically release those numbers. As mentioned in the staff report, we will do our best to make sure that any temporary numbers or cell numbers that we have to use during that transition, should there be a hiccup at all, we'll make sure those are well posted on the city's website, sent out as best we can via social media, and make sure that people have means of getting hold of us via telephone.
Yeah. As far as going to the new system, I mean, it's evident we're not going anywhere. We're getting bigger. We need to upgrade, and that's not an issue for me. But I just, those days that there's going to be that transition, we need to make sure that we stay, available to the public and to the best possible way. And I see that you're going to try to do that. But
absolutely.
And that's one of the advantages when you're dealing with an organization this big. I mean, every day counts. So, that's a big a motivator is if we can just do it in 2 or 3 days versus 2 weeks, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lincoln.
Okay. So just a quick question. Do we have a vendor? I didn't quite catch that in that, or is this, you decided on a product and then you're going to go out for bid or something?
Ring Central is the vendor, and they're on the...
Oh, okay, so you buy direct from them.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. I've used the product, but it's always been like from an external source. So I didn't really understand that. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
And thank you for the work you put into this, Mr. Lincoln. All right, so next we'll go into something that should be relatively quick. The street name revision of Madison Park Phase 7. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, very briefly, but this is an item that will be coming back to council on the November 1st regular meeting date. There was an error in the street naming that was that ended up on the recorded final plat, and the solution for this is for council to adopt a resolution correcting that and have it recorded, and it will follow this final plat around. And it's candidly, it was a little odd because final plats are signed administratively now, and so this is the only process that the surveyor, our legal team, and the county auditor decided would work. So you'll see it again on November 1st.
And I was reading through here, and I think the important thing for me was there's no houses currently on these addresses, correct?
There were not when the report was written. We have issued 2 foundation permits just to keep things moving, making the assumption that the street names would be corrected through the upcoming resolution.
And these property owners or the developers are well aware?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments from council? All right, if not, thank you for that, Mr. White. We'll look forward to seeing that next week. Wow, that was a long list of items. Let's see, we'll go on to miscellaneous council discussion. Anything you want to start with, Mr. Lincoln?
Really quickly, just wanted to remind council that on our next meeting on the 1st and the meeting on the 8th, we'll be starting a little early at 6 p.m. And then I wanted to have Director Ratkai do a really quick update on our Saturday event.
Yeah, real quick, it's been a long meeting, but October 30th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. we'll have our annual trunk or treat at the Giza Stadium parking lot. So This has always been a pretty successful, whether it's COVID or not COVID, event for the community, and Recreation Services is happy to put it on once again this year. So Saturday, 10 to 1, Giza Stadium.
Thank you, Mr. Ratke. Anybody else from council with a miscellaneous discussion? So before we go, yeah, go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
This is Mayor Pro Tem.
Go ahead.
Just a quick reminder, this Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, there is a Coffee with a Cup at Tierra Vida. If you'd like to confirm, Councilmember Alvarado, yes, that's what I was told. Coffee with a Cup this Wednesday at Tierra Vida.
All right, thank you for that, Mayor Pro Tem. And before we go on to the next item, I just want to bring up the fact that for those of you who notice, City Manager Dave Zabel is not here this week, and there's been an unfortunate event in his family, and I just wanted to share my condolences to the family, and our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family. You know, you never know when somebody might be affected by a situation. Anyway, the bottom line is the whole council, I can speak for the council, and please share with us our condolences to Mr. Zabel and his family, and we wish him the best, and we just hope everything turns out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure he appreciates that very much.
Thank you. All right, with that, we will go on to executive session now. The discussion in the executive session will be with legal counsel about current or potential litigation per RCW 42.30.1101I. The executive session is expected to last about 15 minutes. So thank you very much for those who have been here. We will come back and adjourn the meeting after the executive session. It is 9:45 and we should be expected to be back by 10, no later than 10:01. So with that, we're now in the executive session. Thank you. Here we go. It's 10:03. We're back from executive session, and appreciate everybody who came tonight. So with that, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.